Since the dawn of time, there existed beings of incomprehensible power, the Absolute, creators of countless universes in their eternal pursuit of infinity. Their strength knew no bounds, and their thirst for knowledge was insatiable. These beings gave rise to everything: laws, souls, matter, and existence itself. But despite all their creations, the vastness of their power, and the endless possibilities of the cosmos, none of it could stave off their deep and persistent boredom. One absolute being, in particular, turned to a new form of entertainment. He began observing the creatures he had crafted, closely studying their endless struggles, battles, and the intricate web of schemes they spun. Each conflict, each skirmish, fascinated him. He sought answers within their chaos, answers to questions that had plagued him since the first universe was born. He marveled at the creature's capacity for destruction, the endless cycle of war, death, and rebirth. To him, this violent spectacle was more than just amusement, it was a glimpse into the mysteries of existence. But something unimaginable happened. During one of these wars, a creation, one of his own, struck down its creator. For the first time, an absolute had been killed by the very life he had shaped. When the news of this unprecedented event spread, other absolute beings from dimensions beyond reckoning turned their eyes toward the universe left without its master. The death of an absolute at the hands of his creation was a sign, an ill omen. It signaled the awakening of a hidden potential within those crafted beings, a power that had long been dormant. However, this revelation did not stir the other absolutes with concern. They had only one thought in mind: the power left behind by their fallen kin was now free for the taking. And whoever claimed it first would wield unimaginable might. Meanwhile, in a world far removed from these cosmic events, a young boy named Suho received unexpected news. He had been accepted into the prestigious Korean National Institute of Arts. For Suho, it felt surreal, an achievement he never thought possible. His friends, upon hearing the news, were equally stunned. Their faces reflected disbelief, struggling to process what he was telling them. None of them could fully accept the truth, their expressions betraying a mixture of surprise and skepticism, as if they were grasping at the impossible. Suho's friends couldn't believe it. They all doubted that someone as rough around the edges as him could have passed the entrance exam to the Art Institute. One of them even broke down in frustration, insisting that Suho should have retaken the exam. But Suho, laughing along with them, shrugged it off. "Well, I'm finally free from this hell," he joked, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Just then, a voice from behind interrupted the moment. "So, you actually passed the exam?" the voice said with a hint of mockery. Suho turned to see who it was. It was Kim Song-kol, or so he thought. The boy standing there was smirking, clearly intending to stir up trouble. "Since when did you get good at drawing?" Kim Song-kol sneered. But Suho's lightheartedness took a turn as the boy's expression soured. "My name's not Kim Song-kol, it's Lee Un-kol," he snapped, clearly agitated that Suho had messed up his name. However, Suho remained unfazed, pretending he hadn't mixed it up on purpose. He just grinned, playing it off. "Whatever. Anyway, because of you, my plan to get into a good high school was ruined," Un-kol continued, anger bubbling up. Suho, still calm, replied coolly, "And thanks to you, I graduated." Their classmates began to notice the rising tension. They knew Un-kol had a habit of provoking Suho, and it looked like this was going to be another one of those moments. Graduation was just around the corner, yet Un-kol continued behaving immaturely, clinging to his grudges rather than embracing the responsibility and maturity expected of them at such a critical time. The other students couldn't understand why Un-kol still harbored so much resentment towards Suho, especially after everything he'd gone through. Suho had endured the loss of his parents and was simply trying to find a path to happiness in his life. Why was Un-kol picking a fight now? Unable to contain his anger any longer, Lee Un-kol's face twisted with rage as he shouted Suho's name and lunged at him, fist raised, ready to strike. But Suho didn't flinch. He remained completely calm, his body poised as if he had expected the attack all along. The moment Un-kol made his move, Suho reacted with lightning speed, delivering a precise counterstrike on his face. Suho glanced down at him, his expression still composed. "Stay quiet until graduation," he said firmly. But Un-kol wasn't done. With a flash of defiance in his eyes, his resolve only growing stronger. Though he'd been struck on the face, he refused to give up. Lee Un-kol stood tall, a fierce glint in his eyes as he told Suho, "That didn't hurt at all." His hand was enveloped in a strange, glowing energy that Suho had never seen before. It was an unfamiliar power, foreign and unsettling. The mysterious aura pulsed around Un-kol as he unleashed a devastating punch, faster and stronger than anything Suho had ever encountered. It was only by sheer reflex that Suho managed to dodge the attack. Fear and shock were written across his face, and the other students stood frozen, just as stunned by the display of raw strength. Uncall's punch, brimming with energy, wasn't just powerful, it was terrifying. The force of it sent shockwaves through the room, shattering nearby iron lockers as if they were made of paper. Suho, lying on the floor in a daze, was completely paralyzed by what he'd just witnessed. Terror gripped him, rendering him unable to move as Uncall's entire body became shrouded in a brilliant, glowing aura. This energy radiated off of him with such intensity that it made him appear almost otherworldly, like a force capable of destroying anything in his path. The overwhelming power he exuded was something Suho had never thought possible. 2 years passed since that fateful day. Suho, now a second-year university student, walked down the street deep in thought. That day still haunted him, replaying over and over in his mind. While he tried to focus on his studies, the memory of Uncall's terrifying power often crept into his thoughts, leaving a lasting impression on him. As he strolled through campus, Suho overheard a conversation between two men. One was telling the other that all classes in the main building had been moved to a neighboring facility. All students should head there, the man said. Suho assumed this was due to a gate sweep being conducted by hunters nearby. Glancing around, he noticed security personnel stationed everywhere, instructing people to avoid the danger zone. One of the guards asked, "How long has it been since the hunters arrived?" A staff member responded, "Just over an hour. Considering the gate is D rank, they should be finishing up soon." An announcement rang through the area, stating that only authorized hunters could approach the gate. Suho sighed to himself, realizing that yet another gate had appeared. The increased security measures and restricted access served as a stark reminder of how much the world had changed in just 3 short years. 3 years ago, strange, otherworldly gates began opening all across the globe, altering the course of humanity. These gates led to dangerous realms filled with monsters and mysteries, forcing the rise of hunters, individuals trained to combat the threats that emerged from within. Since then, Suho's life, like the rest of the world, had been shaped by this new reality, with no signs of things ever returning to normal. The world as they once knew it was gone, replaced by a reality shaped by the emergence of mysterious gates. These portals, like doorways to another dimension, opened into dungeons teeming with demonic beasts. If left unchecked, these creatures would spill out, wreaking havoc and destroying everything in their wake. But the changes didn't stop with the gates alone, humanity itself began to evolve. Some individuals developed the ability to wield magical energy, and these gifted ones were known as the Awakened. In this rapidly transforming world, the chaos that seemed destined to persist for years was brought under control sooner than anyone expected. An awakened man by the name of Wu Jinchul took the initiative, founding the Hunters Association. He united others like himself, creating an organization to manage the escalating crisis and formalizing the role of hunters. Society was now divided into 2 distinct groups: the awakened, who wielded supernatural power, and ordinary people, who couldn't awaken and had to live in the shadow of those who could. For ordinary people, life felt like an endless struggle, as if they were ants facing monumental challenges, while for the awakened, it seemed as though everything was handed to them on a silver platter. The gap between the 2 groups was undeniable, and those on the weaker side were acutely aware of their limitations. Suho understood this more than most. No matter how hard an ordinary person tried, they could never compete with even the lowest-ranked hunter. In fact, it was the hunters who stood as humanity's last line of defense. If they didn't close the gates, their world would be wiped out. This led Suho to a sobering realization: while the awakened were essential for survival, the ordinary people, like him, were not. Despite his gratitude toward the hunters for making it possible for unawakened people to live in peace, a lingering sense of anxiety gnawed at him. Could he ever accept the fact that he lacked the power he so desperately wanted? His unease stemmed from the feeling of being powerless, a vulnerability that had haunted him ever since his parents disappeared. It gnawed at him, filling the space left by his lost sense of security with helplessness. He often thought about his mother's words, how she would tell him he had taken after his father. Suho found himself wondering what his father would have done in his place. How would he have handled the loss, the dependency on others for survival, the sense of inadequacy? These questions weighed heavily on him. Just as he was lost in thought, a voice snapped him back to reality. His teacher had approached, breaking through his memories. "You were really focused today," the teacher said with a smile. Suho blinked, still caught between the past and present, before nodding in acknowledgement. The teacher glanced at Suho's drawing, tilting his head with mild curiosity. "Is it fun drawing like this?" he asked. Suho, looking at his work, shrugged. "I didn't really think about it. I just drew whatever came to mind." The teacher chuckled softly, then leaned in for a closer inspection. "Your aunt is quite imaginative," he mused. But then his expression changed. "Wait, it's not just an ant, is it? It's a human ant?" Suho stared at the sketch, confused. Why had he drawn such a strange image in the first place? The unsettling picture left him with an odd feeling, as though it carried a meaning he couldn't grasp. Meanwhile, outside near the gate, the staff were preparing to meet the returning hunters. The atmosphere was calm and relaxed, signaling that the raid had been a success. People gathered around the gate, exchanging relieved glances. One of the staff members approached a hunter and greeted him. "Thank you for your hard work, Hunter Kim Jong-soo," he said gratefully. Kim Jong-soo nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "The dungeon's been cleared successfully. We'll need to report to the association right away." "There's something new to report," he said, his voice tinged with unease. "We encountered a new species of demonic beasts. They looked humanoid but had blue flames spewing from their eyes and mouths. They fought with claws and fangs, but they weren't very strong. Just low-level monsters. I got hurt a little, but it wasn't serious. No complications." The hunter paused, reflecting on the creatures. "We've never seen anything like them before, but luckily they don't seem too dangerous," he added. The staff member nodded, suggesting that all the details be included in the official report. But before the conversation could continue, something alarming happened. Out of nowhere, blue flames ignited from the wound on Kim Jong-soo's arm. He winced, feeling a sudden, sharp pain that seemed to spread throughout his body. His sword fell from his grip, his hands trembling as if seized by some invisible force. The staff member nearby noticed something strange. Kim Jong-soo's eyes were glowing with the same eerie blue flames. "Are you all right?" the staff member called out, concern lacing his voice. But there was no answer. Kim Jong-soo stood still, his head bowed, completely unresponsive. Then, without warning, the hunter turned and lunged at him. The flames had taken control, and Kim Jong-soo, now consumed by their power, was no longer himself. The staff member barely had time to react as the possessed hunter attacked, his actions driven by the mysterious blue fire that seemed to strip him of his will. The force that enveloped him was unlike anything they had faced before. The blue flames consumed the employee in an instant, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. The hunters trailing behind Kim Jong-soo were frozen in disbelief. Their leader, who had just cleared the dungeon alongside them, had now annihilated a man who posed no threat. It became painfully clear to them that the flames within this dungeon weren't ordinary. The fire had infected Kim Jong-soo, turning him into a vessel of destruction, capable of spreading the affliction to anyone he bit. Panic erupted. The crowd near the gate realized the gravity of the situation and began to flee in terror, fearing that the infected hunter would turn on them next. People scrambled, searching desperately for shelter, trying to distance themselves from the chaos. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, the peaceful routine of the drawing lesson was abruptly shattered by the commotion outside. The noise grew louder, and the students rushed to the windows, curious and anxious to see what was causing such a disturbance. Suho glanced up from his drawing, confused by the rising shouts. Looking outside, the students were horrified. What they saw defied logic, people attacking each other in a frenzy, their bodies wreathed in blue flames. The flames had an eerie glow, and the people's eyes burned with the same unnatural light, filled with demonic energy. The students quickly deduced that the dungeon hadn't been fully cleared after all. Panic began to spread within the classroom as well. Outside, people were in chaos, some trying to find shelter, others shouting for help, calling for the hunters to save them. But fear was mounting. One student turned to Professor Talum, who was standing by the door, and urgently reminded him that he was an awakened too. "You've got to do something," the student pleaded. But the professor shook his head, his expression grim. "I'm only an E-rank hunter," he said, helplessly. "There's nothing I can do against that." At that moment, Suho's eyes widened as he noticed something alarming. A hunter, engulfed in blue flames, was barreling straight toward the building. Instinct kicked in, and he shouted, "Get away from the windows. Now!" His voice cut through the rising panic as the students scrambled to find safety. But it was too late. The hunter's flaming body crashed through the classroom window with a deafening smash. Glass shards flew everywhere, and the possessed hunter, lost to the blue flames, began attacking anyone in sight. The classroom descended into chaos as the hunter, no longer in control of his own body, unleashed devastation on everyone inside. Suho spun around and bolted toward the exit, yelling for the other students to follow his lead. As he sprinted down the hallway, his heart pounded in his chest. Amid the chaos, his eyes caught sight of a girl lying on the floor, writhing in pain. She was crying, her voice barely audible over the panic, pleading for someone to help her. Her legs were injured, leaving her unable to escape. Frozen for a moment, Suho didn't know what to do. His mind raced. How could he possibly save her? Fear gnawed at him, and without thinking, he turned away and continued running, shouting over his shoulder, "I'll get help. I'll bring the hunters." The words tasted bitter as they left his mouth. He was running away, abandoning her to her fate. But as he fled, the weight of his actions pressed down on him. Guilt clawed at him, the thought of leaving the girl behind gnawing at his conscience. What good was he, an unawakened person, in a situation like this? He couldn't fight, couldn't save her. His powerlessness filled him with frustration. It's all because I'm not awakened, he thought bitterly. Yet, deep down, Suho knew that blaming his lack of abilities wouldn't change anything. If he wanted to make a difference, he had to act. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, remembering his father's words, imagining what his father would have done. His father would never have left someone in danger, no matter the risk. Determined, Suho turned back, eyes wide with fear but also resolve. The possessed hunter was already closing in on the girl, who was screaming, her hands shielding her face as if they could ward off the inevitable. She was alone, completely vulnerable. Without hesitation, Suho grabbed a fire extinguisher from the hallway, charging back into the fray. With a desperate swing, he struck the hunter, the impact enough to knock it back. He continued his frantic assault, using the extinguisher to keep the beast at bay, his heart racing with every blow. The hunter staggered, giving Suho enough time to grab the girl and pull her to safety. Breathing heavily, Suho looked down at her, relieved that he had acted in time. He realized in that moment that this was exactly what his father would have done. He wouldn't have run. He would have faced the danger, no matter how powerless he felt. As Suho helped the girl to her feet, a sudden notification flashed before his eyes. It was a message, something he hadn't seen before. You have completed the hidden quest, Courage of the Powerless. For a split second, Suho remembered a strange dream he once had, a dream so vivid it felt real. Now, in this moment, it seemed like more than just a dream, it felt like something greater was unfolding. In the midst of the chaos, Suho's mind wandered back to a strange dream he had once. In that dream, it felt as though he were in some kind of game where he wielded powerful gloves designed for combat, using them to fend off wave after wave of increasingly dangerous monsters. Every time the monsters grew stronger, Suho had to push himself to find new strategies, new methods of survival. He constantly leveled up, unlocking new skills as he fought, barely keeping the relentless creatures from overwhelming him. With every battle, he became more powerful. Soon, the monsters he faced were nothing short of terrifying, yet each victory fueled his growth. His skills sharpened, his strength increased, and with time, he reached the final level of this dreamlike game. It was there, standing at the threshold of the last challenge, that he encountered the ultimate foe, a towering monster of incredible power. Suho couldn't help but respect the immense strength of the creature, and for a fleeting moment, he even felt a pang of envy. But then, something unexpected happened. The formidable boss he was meant to defeat wasn't a faceless creature at all, it was his father. Staring at him, Suho realized he couldn't bring himself to fight. His father, strong and steadfast, was a figure he admired deeply. But why was he here, standing as the final challenge in this surreal nightmare? Was it just a reflection of his father's strength? Suho found himself paralyzed by the idea of fighting his own father, unsure if this was just a dream or a profound message about strength and sacrifice. As the memory of the dream washed over him, Suho found himself back in the present, holding the fire extinguisher tightly as he prepared to face the possessed hunter. The hunter's entire body blazed with blue flames, completely overtaken by the strange energy. The scene felt eerily similar to the final showdown in his dream. He could almost hear his father's voice in the back of his mind, urging him to act. What would Dad do? Suho thought as he dashed forward. His heart pounded, and the fire extinguisher felt like his only lifeline. With no time to waste, Suho knew he had to face this monstrous hunter. The blue flames crackled around the hunter, giving off an unnatural heat that threatened to consume everything in its path. The hunter moved with menacing intent, but Suho couldn't allow himself to hesitate any longer. He launched himself at the hunter with everything he had. Chaos erupted around Suho as the hunter, engulfed in blue flames, went berserk. The infected hunter lashed out at anyone in his path, spreading the curse to others and transforming them into mindless, flame-possessed monsters. Desperation fueled Suho's actions as he swung the fire extinguisher with all his might, desperately trying to prevent the hunter from biting the other students. With every blow, he thought of his father, the man who would have sacrificed himself without hesitation to save an innocent life. In that moment, Suho resolved to do the same. He managed to hold the hunter at bay, giving the others a chance to escape. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't last. The situation was dire. Suho had no magical abilities and knew that as an unawakened person, he was virtually powerless against monsters like this. The reality of his own recklessness hit him hard. He charged in to save the girl without a plan, and now his life was hanging by a thread. There was no way he could defeat the hunter without magic, and yet here he was, facing down a monster far beyond his capabilities. Then something strange happened. The hunter, who had been advancing with terrifying force, suddenly stopped. It was as if he was suspended in midair, frozen in place. Suho blinked in confusion. He glanced around and realized that everything had stopped. The girl he had just saved stood motionless, and the air itself seemed frozen in time. Suho's heart raced as he tried to make sense of the bizarre scene. It was as if the world had come to a standstill. Amidst the confusion, a new notification appeared in front of him, a message that he had never seen before. Shock washed over him as he read the words, "Secret quest completed, courage of the powerless. You have been offered the chance to become a player." Suho's mind raced. This was exactly like the dream he'd had, the one where he fought monsters and leveled up, becoming stronger with each battle. And just like in the dream, here was an opportunity to gain the power he never had. The power to fight back, to protect others. To become something more than just an ordinary person caught in a world filled with monsters. A smile crept onto Suho's face as he realized what this meant. The system was offering him a way out of his helplessness, a way to finally fight back. The choice was clear. Without hesitation, Suho accepted the offer to become a player. Suho's entire world shifted in that instant. The system congratulated him for becoming a player, signaling that his life would never be the same again. Though the future was uncertain, Suho felt ready to embrace it. As a reward for completing his first quest, the system gifted him a powerful spell from the mage Candiaru. Along with the spell came a profound blessing. Suho was now immune to all illnesses, poisons, and harmful effects, and he would enjoy long life free from disease. However, the system warned him this was no longer a dream. He only had one life, and he needed to tread carefully. Curiosity flooded Suho as he examined his new stats, the window before him resembling the game-like interface from his recurring dreams. It filled him with a sense of familiarity, and surprisingly, he felt a thrill at the possibilities it offered. The system notified him of his next mission. He was tasked with destroying the mist burns and increasing his level. Mist burns were hunters infected by the mysterious blue flame, cursed after a failed attempt to close the gate. As Suho absorbed the notifications, time resumed its natural flow. He glanced at the girl, still frozen in fear, and urged her to run while she had the chance. Looking around, Suho noticed something new. Names and titles floated above the heads of the infected hunters. All of them were now identified as mist burns, marked for him to eliminate. Most were ordinary people, cursed by the flame, but there were also a few who had been hunters before the infection took hold. Among them, Suho spotted 2 mist burns charging toward him, their eyes glowing with that same eerie blue flame. The surviving bystanders were fleeing, desperate to escape the chaos, but Suho remained calm. He had been awakened, and now wielded magical power capable of defeating these monsters. This was the moment to test that power. With determination, Suho gripped the fire extinguisher in his hands. As the first mist burn lunged at him, he swung the extinguisher with all his might. The impact sent the creature flying several meters back, crashing into the ground. Suho discarded the fire extinguisher, eager to test the raw strength of his own fists. He focused intensely, aiming straight for the monster's head, feeling a surge of anger and determination course through him. For the first time, he wasn't gripped by fear, only a desire to unleash his newfound power. With a loud shout, he threw his punch with everything he had, channeling all his strength into the blow. His power had multiplied several times over, and he could sense it. The impact was overwhelming. His punch sent the creature hurtling upward, smashing through the ceiling above them. Suho stood in shock, unable to fully grasp the immense strength he had just displayed. Only moments earlier, this monster could have killed him in a single strike, but now he had obliterated it with one blow. The system confirmed his success with a notification: he had defeated the mist burn unawakened. Staring down at his fist, Suho marveled at what he had just accomplished. As he processed this, another monster launched itself at him. However, Suho was faster now, his reflexes had sharpened. He effortlessly dodged the attack and retaliated, landing a powerful counterstrike that finished the creature instantly. The system chimed again, confirming that Suho had successfully defeated the second mist burn. With his mission complete, he leveled up. A sense of triumph washed over him. Suho was thrilled by his transformation, realizing that he now wielded abilities he had only dreamed of. The system rewarded him for completing his task, but Suho's excitement wasn't just about the notifications. He wanted to explore his powers further. Eager to test his new limits, Suho confronted another monster. This time, he struck with confidence, certain that his attack would be just as effective. But to his surprise, the creature absorbed the blow with barely a flinch. It didn't recoil in pain, and Suho quickly realized that this opponent was far stronger than the ones he had faced before. Suddenly, it dawned on him: his next battle would be much tougher than he anticipated. His earlier victories had been exhilarating, but they hadn't prepared him for what was coming. Suho understood that this fight would require more than brute strength. Suho quickly realized that his opponent was far stronger than he had anticipated. His initial surprise soon turned into anxiety as the monster's resilience forced him to rethink his approach. The creature wasted no time, launching a relentless series of attacks. Each blow was more powerful than the last, and Suho found himself struggling to keep up. He had to endure a barrage of force and fury just to survive, and now, figuring out how to defeat this seemingly invulnerable enemy became crucial. In one fierce strike, the mistborn creature managed to severely wound Suho. A sharp pain shot through him, signaling just how much danger he was in. The situation had grown dire. If he didn't come up with a new strategy soon, he wouldn't last much longer. Gritting his teeth, Suho gathered all his strength and kicked the monster, creating just enough distance between them for him to jump back to safety. As he staggered to a safer position, he took a moment to catch his breath and assess the situation. His body was heavily injured, and he feared that these wounds could cause him to transform into one of the demonic creatures himself. The thought terrified him. He had only just awakened, and now he faced the grim possibility of turning into the very thing he was fighting. Then, the system notification broke through his thoughts. It warned him that his life was in serious danger and that the long life without sickness ability had been activated. Suho had almost forgotten about this reward, one he had received for slaying monsters earlier. Now, it was his lifeline. He wasn't sure exactly how the skill worked, but he hoped it could give him the edge he desperately needed. Suddenly, the monster lunged at him again, knocking him to the ground with immense force. Suho struggled under its crushing weight as it tried to tear him apart. The creature's strength was overwhelming, and Suho could barely fend off its attack. He realized, with a bitter clarity, that he was still too weak compared to even a D-ranked demonic beast. That meant he was likely ranked as an E, which explained why he was struggling so much. Despite this grim realization, Suho was determined to fight back. His awakened power might not be fully developed, but he refused to give up. He did everything he could to keep the monster at bay, grappling with it to stop its fangs from reaching him. Each second was a battle for survival, but deep down, Suho knew he had to find a way to turn the tide before it was too late. Suho had no clear strategy for defeating the monster, but he refused to surrender. He knew that every move he made could decide his fate in this life-or-death struggle. Just as the situation grew more desperate, a system notification flashed before him. He had received a reward, additional skill points and a boost to his strength. This unexpected surge of power renewed his hope, giving him the edge he needed in the fight. Feeling the newfound strength coursing through him, Suho struck the monster with all his might, managing to break free from its crushing grip. With a powerful shove, he hurled the beast across the room, sending it crashing to the ground. He knew he had to act fast. The monster wouldn't stay down for long, and Suho needed to finish it off before it could recover. True to his expectations, the creature quickly regained its footing, and their brutal battle resumed. Suho realized he had to defeat it quickly, or he might not survive another round of attacks. With a deep breath, he launched a devastating strike, hitting the monster so hard that it reeled from the impact, visibly stunned. Sensing an opportunity, Suho pressed on, refusing to let up as he pummeled the creature with everything he had. Despite the relentless barrage, the monster stubbornly endured each blow. To Suho's disbelief, it still fought back with a fury that seemed unshakable. He was beginning to doubt whether he could actually overpower this beast, even with his enhanced abilities. That's when a thought struck him: he hadn't fully utilized his skill points yet. Without hesitation, Suho invested all the points into increasing his strength, hoping it would be enough to turn the tide. As his power surged once more, Suho felt a sense of confidence. He prepared himself for the final showdown, knowing that this boost might be the key to defeating his formidable opponent. The creature charged at him again, but this time Suho was ready. He dodged the attack with newfound agility, countering with a heavy strike that shook the ground. He had never heard of an awakened being able to increase their strength and leveling up, and it defied everything he knew about ranks. But rank didn't matter now, survival did. Suho put everything into his next move, determined to end the battle once and for all. He may not have understood all the mysteries of the system, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. All that mattered was bringing down the monster before it had a chance to inflict a fatal blow. Suho faced the monstrous threat before him, determined to end it once and for all. As he stood there, he realized something important: he was no longer bound by the unfair limitations of the system. He felt a surge of new power coursing through him, giving him the strength to break free from the constraints that once held him back. His next punch was devastating, sending the creature hurtling across the room until it crashed into the far wall. Without hesitation, Suho charged at the downed monster, knowing he couldn't afford to give it a moment's respite. His blows were fiercer, faster, and more powerful than before. There was no stopping him now. The beast, overwhelmed, had no chance to fight back as Suho unleashed a relentless assault. Each strike landed with brutal precision, and the creature could only absorb the punishment. Suho's determination fueled him through the fatigue, his focus locked on one goal: to destroy the monster. After what felt like an eternity of relentless blows, Suho delivered a final, crushing strike, hoping it was enough to end the battle. Panting heavily, his body screamed in exhaustion, but he knew he had to confirm the monster's defeat. As he approached its motionless form, the system chimed in with a notification: he had defeated the creature. Relief washed over him as he realized he had leveled up, gaining not just strength but also new abilities that bolstered his confidence. Finally allowing himself to rest, Suho sank to the ground, catching his breath as the weight of the battle settled in. He glanced down at his hand, noticing the blood staining his knuckles. Clenching his fist, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had awakened. He was no longer the powerless, insignificant person he once thought he was. This was just the beginning. Suho knew that his future had changed forever. No longer feeling like an ant in a world full of predators, he was filled with newfound confidence. Now that he had become an awakened player, he believed he could protect others and confront the chaos spreading throughout his world. With this power, he was certain that he would succeed in the challenges ahead. The unknown hunter moved silently through the sea of monsters, steadily making his way toward the building where Suho was hiding. In his hand, he dragged a massive sword, its weight evident as it scraped along the ground, leaving deep grooves behind. His movements, despite the heavy weapon, were unerringly smooth and agile. As he neared the building, the hunter launched himself into the air with incredible speed and precision, his focus locked on his target. Inside, Suho peered out of a window, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding outside. Suddenly, without warning, a fierce attack was launched in his direction. Suho barely registered the swift motion of the fog burn, a fearsome, awakened monster, drawing its sword and moving toward him with deadly intent. In a brief moment of shock, Suho froze, unsure of how to react. His mind raced as he realized he had to act quickly or face a lethal blow. This creature wasn't just any monster, it was a C-rank mist burn, far stronger than Suho's current level, making the battle seem nearly impossible. The fog burn's attack hit with devastating force, sending chunks of debris and rocks flying in all directions. The impact left a cloud of dust swirling around Suho, obscuring his vision and throwing everything into disarray. The city was in turmoil, and he could hear an urgent announcement echoing from every corner of the streets. The warning was clear: a D-rank dungeon break has occurred near the Korean University district, and residents were ordered to evacuate immediately. High above, soldiers stationed on the rooftops watched the scene below, helplessly standing by as chaos consumed the city. They were ordered not to intervene, frustrating many of them as they saw innocent people falling victim to the madness. The commander, impatient and concerned, asked when the hunters from the association would arrive to help. His subordinate grimly answered that they were still waiting for word. In the midst of this escalating crisis, Suho realized that he was alone in this fight. The fog burn wasn't going to let up, and the authorities weren't coming to save him anytime soon. It was up to him to face this powerful enemy and survive the storm on his own. The commander received an unsettling update: they needed time to assign B-rank hunters to the situation. However, one of the soldiers was taken aback by this. In his mind, a D-rank should have sufficed. He voiced his surprise, but the commander explained that the Hunter Association feared the local hunters might have encountered far greater threats than expected. Scanning the list of infected hunters on his tablet, the soldier's eyes widened when he recognized a familiar face. It shocked him that even a C-rank hunter, with their advanced training and formidable defenses, could fall victim to the infection. Meanwhile, Suho faced a much more immediate threat: a dangerous mist burn had leapt onto his floor. Its eyes burned with malevolence as it gripped a massive sword, ready to strike at any moment. Suho could hardly believe this enemy had ascended from the lower levels to confront him. What made this encounter even more terrifying was the realization that this was no ordinary monster, it was a C-rank, corrupted by the fog. The fact that it wielded a weapon, unlike most other creatures, marked it as something far more dangerous and intelligent. Despite the fear clawing at him, Suho felt a surge of confidence. He had recently leveled up and felt a new sense of strength coursing through him. The mist burn charged forward, swinging its sword in a blur of deadly precision, but Suho narrowly dodged the blow, his pulse racing from the close call. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from a strange exhilaration. Quickly regaining his composure, Suho braced himself, preparing for the next assault. Yet, to his surprise, the mist burn didn't immediately follow up with another attack. The sudden pause in action heightened Suho's tension. He stood on edge, waiting anxiously for the creature's next move, knowing that even a moment of distraction could be fatal. The mist-burned silence was unnerving. Its unpredictability only fueled Suho's unease. This wasn't just a monster, it was a cold, calculating psychopath whose erratic nature made it even more dangerous. Suho knew he had to stay sharp, for this opponent's next move could determine whether he lived or died. The monster raised its sword again, ready to strike Suho, who stood cornered against the wall. Its overwhelming strength and ruthless intent were clear. This creature would annihilate anything in its path. As the monster lunged forward, Suho acted fast, hurling a fire extinguisher at it. Without hesitation, the monster sliced the extinguisher in half, releasing a dense cloud of mist that quickly enveloped the entire room. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and Suho found himself surrounded by a thick haze. With tension rising, Suho knew the oppressive fog could be his one chance to escape. The monster was far too powerful to face head-on, and continuing the fight in this state would be suicide. The smart move was to retreat and buy time until reinforcements arrived. Suho realized this monster was on a completely different level, a true menace even for someone who had recently awakened. His best hope was to survive until the hunters showed up. Making his decision, Suho bolted for the door. But before he could get far, he sensed the presence of the creature behind him, tracking his every move. The monster's eyes gleamed with a sinister glow, its lips curling into a cruel smile. There was no mistaking the hatred and malicious joy in its expression, it was enjoying the hunt. Suho's mind raced as he dashed through the building. He knew the danger was far from over, and every step he took needed to be precise. As he passed a window, he noticed the monster halt suddenly, its gaze fixed on something outside. Peering through the window, Suho saw what had drawn the creature's attention: 3 young girls huddled together on the rooftop. They were terrified, completely unaware of the danger lurking just below them. Realizing the opportunity, the monster shifted its focus, leaping out of the window and setting its sights on the defenseless girls. They had no chance to fight back or flee, the monster's fatal blow was imminent. Suho, now free of its pursuit, paused as he processed what was happening. The monster had abandoned its hunt for him and was about to attack innocent bystanders. He watched in horror as the creature closed in on its new targets. This was no longer just about survival, he now had to make a choice. Would he flee while he had the chance, or would he intervene and risk his life to save them? The monster swung its sword at the girls, but they managed to dodge, their terrified screams echoing through the city. Hearing their cries, Suho's anger surged. He knew he couldn't just run anymore, he had to confront this powerful foe. Without a second thought, he sprinted and leaped from the window, pursuing the monster that was chasing the fleeing girls. Waiting for the hunters was no longer an option. If anyone was going to save them, it would have to be him. The monster, oblivious to Suho's pursuit, was caught off guard when Suho attacked from behind. The sudden strike only momentarily fazed the beast, who quickly spun around, eyes blazing with fury. Suho, bracing himself for a counterattack, realized just how outmatched he was. The monster barely seemed to register his blows, and with a swift swing of its sword, it launched a devastating attack. Suho narrowly dodged, the blade passing just inches from his body. Breathing heavily, Suho took a step back to evaluate the situation. He was keenly aware that a single hit from this monster would be fatal. Glancing around, he noticed the destruction the creature had already caused. Several girls on the rooftop had already fallen to its rampage. Anger flared again in Suho's chest, and he resolved not to let the monster take any more lives. Determined, he launched a relentless barrage of punches, aiming to slow the beast down. Blow after blow, Suho hit it with all his strength, his fist slamming into the creature's body. But no matter how hard he struck, the monster remained standing, unfazed by the onslaught. Suho's attacks began to weaken as fatigue set in, and the realization dawned on him: this monster was far tougher than he had anticipated. Just as Suho's strength was waning, the monster saw its opportunity. With frightening speed, it swung its sword and landed a brutal hit on Suho, cutting deep into his flesh. Staggering from the wound, Suho realized just how dangerous his situation had become. Suho writhed in agony from the deep wound as the monster closed in, determined to finish him off. With one powerful strike, it sent Suho crashing into the wall, his body collapsing to the ground. Struggling to move, he could barely register the pain. His health was critically low, and he felt the cold grip of death creeping closer. For a brief moment, Suho believed it was the end. He had lost. But strangely, he hadn't perished instantly. The system hadn't let him die, at least not yet. As the monster approached, it began to laugh, a dark and malicious sound that filled the air. It relished its victory, confident that Suho's defeat was certain. This sense of superiority only made it more dangerous, its malevolence fueling its power. Suddenly, a strange crack appeared. He raised his trembling hands. Suho was barely holding in. The crack intensified, it was like dimension itself was shattering. But there was no time to fully comprehend what was happening. The monster was already looming over him, ready to strike. The system's notifications warned that Suho's fatigue was at critical levels. His vision blurred, and his consciousness began to fade. He was too weak to defend himself, too exhausted to continue fighting. Just as the monster raised its weapon for the final blow, the sky above them started to crack. The sound echoed like a thunderclap, and before either of them could react, the entire structure began to collapse. Suho's eyes widened as the sky crumbled, and chaos erupted around them. The roof suddenly gave way as an unknown creature burst through, shattering the structure. Suho could barely comprehend what was happening. He had no idea what this new monster was, but one thing was clear, it had unintentionally saved him by interrupting the deadly battle. Both Suho and the monster plummeted down from the rooftop, unable to stop their descent. Suho's body, weakened and exhausted, had no strength left to brace for the impact. He hit the ground hard, the force of his fall sending shockwaves through the earth. The ground beneath him cracked, chunks of debris flying in all directions. His vision was blurred, and his strength was draining fast. Blood seeped from his wounds as he lay motionless, barely conscious. In those fleeting moments, thoughts raced through his mind, and oddly enough, he recalled an ant, a figure he often drew. It was a strange memory to surface at the brink of death, but it brought a sense of calm. As darkness began to consume him, Suho heard a voice, one that apologized for arriving too late. A large ant-like figure stood over him, confirming it was the one who had saved him. Suho, still disoriented, realized this creature had come just in time to prevent his demise. The ant-like being turned its gaze to the monster that had almost killed Suho, seething with rage. It vowed to make the creature pay for what it had done, and without hesitation, it launched a swift, deadly attack. The once menacing monster stood no chance as it was obliterated, reduced to nothing but shattered remnants in a matter of seconds. Meanwhile, other creatures roamed the Institute grounds, hunting for more victims to infect with their cursed blue flames. One of them locked onto a man standing nearby, completely unaware of the danger creeping toward him. The man, deep in thought, was gripping a mop, entirely oblivious to the approaching terror. When he finally noticed the creature, terror froze him in place. His face drained of color, paralyzed by the fear of the monstrous thing now advancing on him. Panic gripped the man as he realized the danger. His mind raced, desperate to figure out how to save himself, but fear had frozen his body. In a frantic burst of energy, he threw his mop aside and started yelling for help, clutching his head in terror. With his head lowered, he didn't even notice the monster about to attack him had already been obliterated. In the blink of an eye, all the monsters in the area were wiped out, their destruction resonating across the city. A powerful echo followed, rippling through the air as Beru unleashed an overwhelming surge of magical energy. Soldiers stationed nearby felt a strange, potent force but couldn't grasp what had just occurred. Their confusion was palpable. Meanwhile, Beru swiftly returned to his master, Suho. With a fond smile, he remarked how long it had been since they last met, expressing joy at seeing his young monarch again. Memories flooded back as Beru recalled Suho as a small child, sitting in his room, sketching shadow warriors. In one of those moments, Suho had looked up, astonished, to see the real Beru holding his drawing. The sight had left Beru deeply moved, realizing that his young master had imagined and drawn him long before their fateful encounter. The moment was so touching that Beru had to hold back tears, overwhelmed by the beauty of that connection. Back in the present, Suho began to regain consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. Wrapped in a blanket and lying in a bed, he was disoriented. The first word he uttered was "Aunt?" But the doctor standing nearby was puzzled, unsure of what Suho meant. Shortly after, Suho received a call from his uncle. He checked Suho's condition, asking how badly he had been hurt and mentioning that the world had grown far too dangerous. He even suggested hiring a few bodyguards for Suho's safety. But Suho, still slightly dazed, assured him that he was fine. Turning his attention to the TV, he saw a news broadcast covering the recent incident at the University of Arts. The attack, which had left numerous people injured, was now the subject of intense discussion and government scrutiny. The Mist Burns incident shook the entire city when a mysterious creature appeared, charging at hunters and transforming them into monsters. Despite the chaos unfolding in the heart of the city, the Hunter Association struggled to respond quickly. By the time the hunters arrived on the scene, the city lay in ruins, engulfed in destruction. Yet, what baffled everyone was not the devastation, but the strange fact that all the monsters had already been eliminated. The burning question remained, who or what had wiped them out? Rumors began to circulate among shocked witnesses. Some claimed to have seen the transformed hunters, the ones who had become monsters, suddenly reappearing, almost out of thin air. Suho sat on the hospital bed, barely able to believe what he was seeing. It felt too surreal, as though he was trapped in a dream. Yet, he soon realized that this was all too real. His thoughts drifted to the phenomenon of awakening and how it made individuals stronger as their levels increased. Suho was only level 5, and he vaguely recalled earning a small rank boost during a desperate fight with a hunter who had been infected by the mist burns. But he couldn't explain how he had managed to survive that encounter. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind, explaining that it was Beru who had saved him by eliminating the parasites responsible for the transformation. Startled, Suho glanced at the ground and saw a massive shadow with large, luminous eyes gazing back at him. Beru had returned to his shadow form, and his deep voice brimmed with emotion. "It's been so long, my young lord," he said, his tone warm with recognition. "You've grown into such an incredible person?" The sight of Beru stirred something deep within Suho, long-forgotten memories slowly resurfaced. He recalled how, as a child, he had a fascination with ants, and among them was a black creature that had been with him during his youth. But why were these memories only returning now? Beru's words provided a clue. Beru had crossed the boundary of dimensions to find him again. Despite the reunion, Suho was still overwhelmed with questions. Why had he lived among these black creatures as a child? Why had his memories been locked away for so long? At that moment, Suho's memories became the most pressing concern. He realized he had grown stronger, yet something was still off. Beru, noticing Suho's confusion, explained that crossing dimensions demanded an immense amount of mana. When Beru first arrived, his appearance was imposing and grand, but the system had registered him as a mere common soldier. Upon learning this, Beru was enraged, displeased with the fact that his power had been diminished to such a lowly rank. The thought of being reduced to a common soldier insulted him. Suho quickly stood up, trying to reassure him. "I feel better now, was that because of you?" he asked, piecing things together. Beru confirmed this with a nod. "Yes, I healed you," he said. Suho, amazed by Beru's abilities, felt grateful, but the conversation soon shifted to something deeper. Beru revealed that Suho's true mission involved dispelling the shadow seal, a powerful restraint that had bound him. However, Beru also noted that Suho had already broken the seal on his own, perhaps unknowingly. This revelation unsettled Suho. What did the seal have to do with him, and why was Beru talking as if Suho had some greater destiny? Beru began to explain further. "Everything you've seen, everything you've lived through, it's all real. And you've grown much stronger since we last met. The great Shadow Monarch, Sung Jinwoo, sealed both your power and your memories long ago. He did this to allow you to live a normal life, free from the burdens of your lineage." Suho's mind raced, struggling to process what he was hearing. Sung Jinwoo, his father, was the one who had sealed away his powers? The realization hit him like a tidal wave. "My father? He did this?" Suho stammered, his voice barely audible. He had always assumed his father had simply left their family, abandoning them for reasons unknown. But Beru was quick to clarify. "No, your father didn't leave home. He ascended to another plane of existence, into the vast expanse of space," Beru explained, his voice filled with reverence. Suho's confusion deepened. Space? What did that mean? He couldn't comprehend what Beru was telling him. Beru continued, his tone serious. "The Shadow Army now fights a cosmic battle. Your father, Sung Jinwoo, is out there, defending our world. He's risking his life, fighting against unimaginable monsters to keep this realm safe. His opponents are powerful entities, and among them is Teetering, the absolute being seeking to conquer our world by sending its apostles to Earth." Beru explained that he had to slay countless monsters in his way to meet Suho. As Beru spoke, Suho's thoughts drifted to his mother, who had vanished years ago. "What about my mother?" Suho asked hesitantly. "She disappeared when I was still with my father. Are they together?" Beru's expression softened. "No, your mother is not with him. Her disappearance is tied to other forces at play, but she's not with Sung Jinwoo." This only raised more questions for Suho. His father was battling for the survival of their world in space, and his mother had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The more Beru explained, the more Suho felt like his entire understanding of his life had been turned upside down. Upon hearing Suho mention his mother, Beru's anger flared. He couldn't comprehend how someone as important as Miss Hain had simply vanished. His suspicion immediately turned toward the apostles, convinced that this was a result of their trickery. There was no doubt in his mind. Suho, taking in Beru's words, asked if the Teetering were responsible, if these creatures had interfered in his parents' lives, preventing them from returning. Beru saw the deep desire in Suho's eyes, realizing just how much the young lord longed to reunite with his parents. "Of course, I want to see them," Suho responded with determination. But it seems the only way to do that is to become stronger, to rescue my mother and meet my father. Beru, however, explained that because of the ongoing war with the Iterim, Suho's father couldn't return to Earth. If Suho wanted to save his mother, he would have to grow powerful enough to do it on his own. Beru told him there was a path forward, a key to unlocking greater strength. As they spoke, a notification window suddenly appeared before Suho, outlining a new quest, Shadow Test. The system revealed that Suho, as the son of the great Shadow Monarch, had immense innate abilities, but they were all sealed away. To regain his power, Suho would need to prove himself. His first step was to enter the Dark Dungeon, where he would be tested. The key to the Dark Dungeon would grant him access, but it could only be used in the shadow of the Sacred Protector. Beru immediately urged Suho to use the key. You must place it in your own shadow, Beru instructed. As Suho followed the guidance, a shadow gate materialized before him. The portal inside it shimmered, waiting for him to pass through. Beru gave him one final piece of advice before Suho entered the portal. Go inside, young master, and reclaim the powers that are yours by right. But even as Suho stood at the threshold of the portal, doubt swirled in his mind. How could all of this be real? A cosmic war, gods, Shadow Monarch, it all seemed so impossible. Yet, despite his confusion, one thing was clear: he had to gather his strength, to reunite with his family. He knew that the only way to do this was by leveling up and becoming strong enough to face the powerful enemies standing in his way. Resolute, Suho stepped forward, determined to push his limits and gain the strength necessary to protect those he loved. No matter how long it took or how difficult the path ahead might be, he would fight to save his parents and uncover the truth behind the forces that tore them apart. As Suho gave his determined speech about growing stronger to save his family, Beru felt a surge of excitement. His thoughts drifted back to the moment when his master, the Shadow Monarch Sung Jin-woo, had entrusted him with a crucial task. He remembered Sung Jin-woo's instructions vividly: he was to travel to Earth and break the seal on Suho's memories. The monarch had warned Beru that the Iterim, a looming threat, could one day invade Earth, and Suho would need to be ready to defend it. Sung Jin-woo had given Beru the freedom to act according to the situation on Earth, trusting him to protect Suho and help him regain his strength. Now, Beru was fully committed to staying by Suho's side and guiding him on the path to leveling up. As Suho stepped through the portal into the unknown, Beru followed closely behind. On the other side, Suho emerged into a strange, dark realm. Beru explained the grim nature of this place. This is the Dark Dungeon, the abode of the dead, Beru said, his voice serious. No living being can enter here without the master's permission. It's inhabited by dangerous creatures, and surviving here is no easy task. Suho took in his surroundings and immediately felt a sense of discomfort. The dungeon didn't resemble a typical underground cavern. Instead, it looked more like a crumbling, abandoned city, filled with shadows and eerie silence. Despite his unease, something about this place seemed oddly familiar, as if he had been here before, though he couldn't quite place the memory. His thoughts were interrupted as a notification window popped up, displaying a status message. The message was blunt: the leadership of the Dungeon of Shadows would never recognize someone as weak as Suho as its master. To prove himself, he would need to survive for the allotted time, 4 hours. Suho read the notice and steeled himself for the challenge ahead. The moment the trial began, a creature lunged at him from behind. Suho barely had time to react, but his instincts kicked in. He spun around and delivered a swift kick, sending the attacker flying. As the creature tumbled to the ground, Suho saw that it was a goblin, but not just any goblin, it was a scout. Before Suho could fully process what had happened, Beru warned him. If there's a scout, more goblins are likely nearby. You need to deal with it quickly before it alerts the others. Realizing the danger, Suho tightened his fist and prepared himself for the oncoming fight. He had no choice but to stay sharp, knowing that the survival of this trial, and his quest to reclaim his powers, depended on his ability to defeat whatever enemies came his way. Suho charged into the fray with fiery determination, ready to face the goblins head-on. Beru, however, cautioned him to approach the situation carefully. "Young lord, there are goblins here, but be mindful. Don't be reckless," Beru advised. He pointed out that this particular goblin was nameless and weak, lacking any special attributes or even a distinctive color. "It's several times weaker than you," Beru added. Ignoring his opponent's apparent frailty, Suho seized the goblin by the arm, gripping tightly, and in one swift motion retrieved the creature's stone axe from his inventory. With a single, powerful swing, he obliterated the goblin in seconds. A notification flashed across his vision, confirming the defeat of the goblin scout. He turned to Beru, remarking that opponents stronger than him displayed names in different colors, marking their danger levels. Just as Suho finished speaking, an odd sound reached their ears. Both turned to see another goblin perched on a rooftop, letting out a loud call to summon its allies. Frustrated by the scout's cry, Suho braced himself as, within moments, other goblins appeared, their names highlighted in yellow, stronger foes than before. Along with them came goblin captains, their presence radiating an added layer of threat. Suho quickly asked Beru if he could assist in the fight. Beru, however, had his limitations. He explained that, being far from his lord, he couldn't replenish his magic power efficiently. He needed to conserve his strength, and if he participated, Suho's experience points would be significantly reduced. Realizing that Beru wouldn't be able to step in, Suho accepted that he'd have to handle the situation on his own. Steeling himself, Suho activated one of his abilities. With a focused thought, he called upon the skill, and the goblin's battle axe behind him began to lift into the air, seemingly under its own power. The weapon hovered, then surged forward, guided by Suho's will. As he manipulated the axe with skillful precision, he struck down one goblin after another, the weapon cutting a path through the crowd as if wielded by an invisible hand. The status window displayed a new skill acquisition, hinting that Suho's command over the weapon was like that of an invisible hand. Pleased with his success, Suho pressed on, determined to prove his strength and hone his abilities as he took down each opponent in his path. Just then, an arrow whizzed past Suho's head, narrowly missing him. Reacting swiftly, he raised his hand and caught it mid-air, his gaze snapping upward to locate the archer. Perched on a rooftop was a goblin with a magical bow, drawing back the glowing string for another shot. However, Suho didn't give it a chance. Within seconds, he launched a counterattack, obliterating the goblin archer with swift precision. Observing the unfolding battle, Beru felt a sense of adaptability, a reminder of the old memory. He recalled stories of the Little Lord, a mythical figure who wielded the power of the lords freely, which he inherited from Monarch. Although this power was immense, it brought unintended chaos to the peaceful lands around him. Now, however, with the apostles invading once again, Beru sensed that his power would be used to protect rather than destroy, a rebirth of the Little Lord's legend in his own hands. As Suho continued fighting, he felt a surge of strength within him, leveling up and unlocking even greater potential. He sensed that he could now exert more force, even if it was still modest. Just as he acknowledged this newfound power, another goblin stealthily crept up behind him and struck, grinning in twisted satisfaction as it believed it had gained the upper hand. But Suho was faster. He retaliated instantly, taking down the goblin in one decisive blow. Beru watched closely, assessing Suho's endurance and asking how he was faring. Yet Suho's attention quickly shifted as a new, intimidating presence entered the battlefield, emitting an overwhelming aura of red energy. It was a goblin centurion, towering over the others and radiating sheer strength. Suho kept his composure, barely acknowledging the goblin's might. He steadied his weapon, positioned himself in a defensive stance, and prepared for the swarm of enemies that now surrounded him. With fluid precision, Suho launched into battle, slashing his way through goblin after goblin, his blade cutting down every creature that dared to face him. In the heat of combat, he saw an opportunity and hurled his dagger straight at the goblin centurion. The blade streaked through the air with remarkable speed, striking its target perfectly. For the first time, Suho felt fully alive, his energy surging with each powerful strike. Now, with his powers growing, he was ready to face whatever came his way, wielding the strength and skill he'd worked to unlock in the heart of battle. As Suho continued his fierce battle, his enemy's energy steadily dwindled, yet the fight was far from over. Determined to prove his strength, he poured all his energy into each strike, fully committed to enduring for the 4-hour duration, his best opportunity to gain significant experience against such formidable opponents. Moments later, the notification system blinked to life, alerting him that he had unlocked a new skill. Resilience. His level rose, signaling a noticeable increase in his power. With renewed vigor, Suho quickly eliminated the remaining goblins in his path, only to see another prompt indicating he had mere minutes left to complete the trial. Beru, watching closely, praised Suho's progress, voicing his certainty in the young lord's ability to conquer the challenge. The notification system soon confirmed Suho's success, announcing his reward for completing the mission, a runestone. Beru's excitement was palpable, explaining that this stone contained the power of shadow extraction. By using it, Suho could unlock the potential to create shadow soldiers, a skill that had defined the Shadow Monarch himself. Suho examined his gains, noticing that his resilience skill now empowered him with greater endurance, a clear sign of his awakening. Compared to his previous state, he was far stronger, and Beru revealed that Suho's leveling system was an advanced form of the one his father, the Shadow Monarch, had used. This system was specifically tailored to facilitate Suho's steady growth, solidifying his role as the mightiest Shadow Lord yet. With the runestone in hand, Suho felt its potent energy and cracked it open, letting its power flow into him. A new notification appeared, confirming he had unlocked shadow extraction, allowing him to turn the bodies of fallen creatures into loyal soldiers bound to him. This ability mirrored that of a necromancer's skill but was unique in that Suho could only resurrect beings weaker than himself, ensuring his mastery over them. Although he had heard that summoning skills were often overlooked by other hunters, but Beru sensed that his newly gained shadow extraction was anything but ordinary. It was the very essence of his father's legendary power, an ability capable of shaping armies from shadows and defining his path as the new Shadow Monarch. As Suho prepared to use his new shadow extraction ability, the notification system prompted him to assign a unique command for the skill. Realizing the need for a distinct phrase, he pondered briefly before settling on a powerful and familiar command, "Arise," the same phrase his father had once used. The moment he spoke it, shadows began to coalesce, and from the darkness, small figures started to take form. To his amazement, a group of shadow goblins appeared, smaller and slightly weaker than their original selves but unmistakably under his command. Suho's initial doubts faded. Shadow extraction was clearly a skill of immense value. The system informed him that these shadow soldiers would persist for 24 hours before dissipating, and Beru, observing, remarked that Suho had yet to unlock the shadow power skill, something that could enhance his intelligence and strengthen his soldiers over time. Though Suho acknowledged this, he assured Beru it was no cause for concern. Just then, Suho's stomach let out a loud growl, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in over a day. He asked Beru how they could leave the dungeon, to which Beru explained that with the shadow dungeon key, he could exit whenever he wished. Deciding it was time for a meal, Suho exited the dungeon and soon found himself sitting in a makeshift hospital tent, savoring a simple yet surprisingly delicious meal. As he ate, Beru watched over him, addressing Suho as "my little overlord" and informing him of the three primary tasks that lay ahead. The first was to defend Earth from the demonic entities threatening it. Suho suggested they could tackle this by delving into dungeons to hunt these creatures, an idea Beru approved, noting that such hunts would strengthen both Suho and his soldiers, thus securing Earth further. The final task was more personal and pressing, to find Suho's missing mother, whose whereabouts remained a mystery. Determined, Suho knew that with Beru's guidance and his growing powers, he'd be able to fulfill each of these missions and unlock the full potential within him. Suho asked Beru if there was any possible way to locate his mother. Beru replied that, while they couldn't pinpoint her exact location, defeating more of these creatures in dungeons might eventually reveal clues. They both knew the third task, finding Suho's mother, was crucial. For now, however, Beru emphasized his need to regain lost strength. He wanted to unleash his true power, something he felt had faded after serving as a regular soldier. When Suho inquired about how to restore Beru's strength, Beru explained that he could absorb certain magical items, which would be converted into shadow energy. Although it wasn't as efficient as pure magic, it could still boost his strength. With a plan forming, Suho decided to begin dungeon training to prepare for what lay ahead. To enter the dungeons officially, however, Suho needed his magical abilities evaluated by the Hunter Association. While he had been rapidly leveling up since his awakening, Suho hoped for a high grade, ideally S rank. Yet, to his disappointment, the association's assessment placed his magical ability at E rank, branding him one of the weakest hunters. Frustrated, he left the association and vented his concerns to Beru, who reassured him. Beru explained that a hunter's ranking was typically based on raw magic power, so Suho, who had prioritized his physical abilities over magic, would understandably rank lower in this system. But Suho wasn't looking for consolation, he was frustrated. He realized that the shadow powers would ultimately demand a higher level of magical strength to defend Earth, but he needed a way to join a dungeon team, as hunters with such a low rank couldn't participate solo. Despite the setback, Suho thought of a solution that he intended to test immediately. If he couldn't rely on the association's ranking alone, he'd find another way to prove his strength and gain access to the dungeons. In the world of dungeon exploration, there were various roles beyond just the frontline fighters. Suho learned that the capture team fought the dungeon creatures directly, the collection team gathered creature remains, and finally, the extraction team handled the process of retrieving resources and magic crystals. To his surprise, he discovered that even lower-ranked hunters, like himself, could join the extraction team, which meant he had a ticket into the dungeons, albeit in a supporting role. One day, as Suho stood by while workers hauled large magic crystals from the dungeon, he couldn't help but scratch his head, realizing how grueling this job was. Turning to a nearby hunter, he greeted him gratefully. This man was one of the few familiar faces around. The hunter introduced himself as a teaching assistant in the art department at a university in Korea. Also an E rank, he had awakened on his own and was thankful for the opportunity to work in the dungeon. Out of nowhere, the man began apologizing, explaining that he hadn't been much help back when Suho was a student. Suho remembered his reaction when he'd first learned he was awakened. He'd mentioned his E rank status, which didn't inspire confidence. But now, Suho reassured his former teacher's aide, encouraging him to raise his head, as they were both in the same boat. The association usually advised E rank hunters to retreat from any creature they encountered in the dungeon, but Suho's determination had been different. The aide, however, seemed both puzzled and impressed. He recalled a time he'd seen Suho battling a creature on a rooftop, but he'd thought his eyes must have deceived him. It seemed impossible for an E rank hunter to take on a creature like that, he remarked. If your rank improved since then, well, that's something else. Just then, Beru appeared at Suho's side, amused. With a slight smile, he affirmed, the young lord is certainly something special. The guy spun around, eyes wide, at the unfamiliar voice. When he spotted Beru, the shadow soldier, he instantly stumbled back, yelling that a demonic creature had somehow appeared inside the dungeon. Suho frowned, puzzled by Beru's sudden materialization. Why did you step out of the shadows? He asked, trying to understand his companion's timing. Beru, with a calm demeanor, explained, young lord, you're still barely at the level of a hatchling ant larva. It's safer if I remain visible to guard you. The man, still looking shaken, rose to his feet and asked if Suho had become a summoned hunter. Suho shrugged with a grin, saying, it seems that way. Guess I'm lucky, many hunters don't have any skills at all. With a teasing glint in his eye, Suho ribbed the man about his speed, noting that he'd certainly been quick to escape from the monsters earlier. The hunter, clearly embarrassed, sat back down nervously, prompting Suho to laugh and assure him it was only a joke. As they advanced deeper into the cave-like dungeon, Suho found himself immersed in its eerie quiet. Unlike the shadow dungeon he had once experienced, this was his first official foray into a dungeon with a mining team, where they pursued demonic creatures together. Few hunters peered into the dungeon, noting they had only encountered demonic wolves so far, but knew that wolf pelts fetched a high price on the market. They needed to gather these pelts and look out for valuable magic stones, too. The idea of a big reward kept them moving, eager to reach the dungeon's core to see what awaited them. Then, one of the hunters spotted something strange up ahead. As they entered the next chamber, they found themselves standing in a massive, brightly glowing room. The walls were covered in intricate symbols and carvings, but they couldn't make sense of what these ancient markings meant. Unsure what they were facing and suspicious of the room's unsettling silence, one of the hunters suggested calling for backup. Despite the vast, illuminated space, they could see no sign of demonic creatures, though the room had a foreboding atmosphere. Suddenly, their eyes were drawn to a peculiar object resting on a pedestal in the center of the room, a strange, ancient-looking weapon, unlike anything they had ever encountered. The entire team paused, sharing bewildered glances. Was this some kind of hidden treasure, or a deadly trap waiting to be sprung? Cautiously, they edged closer, determined to uncover its secrets. The hunters debated in excitement, wondering if the mysterious weapon embedded in the ground might be a rare treasure instead of the dungeon's boss. Most were captivated by the thought of treasure hidden here, especially as the weapon itself appeared to radiate power. One hunter, skeptical but curious, suggested they test it to see if it was real, though another quickly warned him to be cautious, such valuable objects could be booby-trapped. Ignoring the caution, the captain approached the weapon confidently, reaching out to grasp it. As his fingers wrapped around the hilt, the blade ignited in a brilliant flash, bathing the chamber in a dazzling glow. The captain murmured something about his C rank, certain he could handle anything the weapon threw at him. But as the light enveloped him, his surroundings morphed into a strange and unfamiliar realm, bewildering both him and the others. One of his comrades, standing nearby, noted that while no immediate trap was evident, the captain should tread carefully with the weapon. Just as they reassured themselves, the captain swung the sword, and, to everyone's horror, struck down one of his own teammates. The other hunters recoiled, struggling to process the brutality of his action. Slowly, they watched as the captain's form distorted and twisted, his voice morphing into something darker. Declaring himself as the Sword of Monarch of the Fang, he vowed to destroy any who dared intrude upon his domain, the Fang monarch's territory. With terrifying precision, he proceeded to tear through his former allies, striking them down one by one. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, the support crew remained blissfully unaware that a gate had just sealed them off from the main team. In the midst of this, Suho turned to his companion, displaying his ability to summon goblins as allies. His comrade, astonished, remarked that most summoning abilities allowed for 1 or 2 creatures, yet Suho had conjured 3 with ease. This power was clearly out of the ordinary, yet his rank remained bafflingly low. He continued, noting the constraints of Suho's power. Shadow extraction required a body to work, which limited its usefulness. But with the goblin corpses strewn across the dungeon, Suho could use them as a steady supply of labor, ensuring his summoning skills were as effective as possible. Suho was beginning to appreciate the immense potential of his shadow extraction ability. Being a lower-ranked hunter, he knew the Hunter Association strictly prohibited solo dungeon entries for those classified in his tier. However, he also recognized that the classification system wasn't foolproof. Over time, more errors surfaced in the grading process, often due to malfunctions in the evaluation machines. Suho speculated that as he leveled up, he might get reassessed and earn a higher rank. Turning to Beru, he brought up their third mission. Remember our objective? If it involves gaining strength by consuming magical energy, these crystals are the perfect source, Suho suggested, gesturing toward the magic crystals strewn about. Beru agreed, affirming that the crystals, though usually left as loot, contained latent magical power that could be harnessed. Beru went to absorb mana from magic crystals. Just then, he sensed something. Turning to Suho, Beru told him that he felt the presence of a monarch. Curious, Suho then asked, Beru, could the monarch truly have appeared here? Was it my father? Beru shook his head, explaining that although Suho's father held the title of monarch, he wasn't the only one with that title. If it were your father, my powers would have been restored by now. No, this presence is something else entirely, Beru warned, advising caution. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, the diggers were oblivious to the impending danger until a rumbling echoed ominously from a cavern ahead. Turning toward the sound, they froze in shock as a monstrous form began to emerge. At first, they couldn't comprehend the source of the disturbance, assuming it might just be a large animal. But as they drew closer, horror dawned upon them. It was an unmistakably demonic creature, something that hadn't been there when the hunters first entered the dungeon. The workers scrambled to flee, panic erupting as they dashed toward the exit. One miner, trapped between terror and desperation, swung his pickaxe wildly, waving it at the demon as if to ward it off. But as the monstrous creature lunged forward, his pickaxe did little to keep it at bay. The demon advanced, ready to strike, while the workers' frantic retreat continued in sheer panic, the dungeon filling with echoes of their desperate flight. The miner watched in horror as the demon dog's powerful jaws crushed his pickaxe into splinters in mere moments. Shocked by how quickly the weapon was destroyed, he felt a wave of panic rise. He knew his own life was likely next. Heart pounding, he yelled for help, hoping that one of the hunters might hear him in time. The demon dog lunged for him, but he managed to leap backward, buying himself a precious second. In that instant, Suho appeared from nowhere, striking the demon dog squarely on the head with a powerful blow. I'll hold them off. You get out of here, he shouted urgently to the miner. His partner, barely able to process what had happened, nodded gratefully and took off as fast as his legs could carry him, glancing back once to mouth a silent thank you. With his companion safe, Suho assessed the pack of demon dogs before him. Their names were displayed in a fierce orange, signaling their threat level. These creatures were far from easy prey, far tougher than any mist burners he'd faced before. But Suho felt confident. His recent level gains had bolstered his power, and he was more than ready to face them. Irritation sparked as he considered the miner's hesitation. You should be running by now, Suho muttered, annoyed that he always ended up jumping in to save others. The miner called back in a shaky voice, insisting he wanted to help however he could. Shaking his head, Suho left 3 goblin shadows nearby for added protection, just in case his partner ran into trouble. He then pulled up his inventory, selecting his best weapons for the job, relics he'd acquired in the Shadow Dungeon, weapons far superior to a mere pickaxe. His partner gaped in disbelief as Suho's arsenal appeared, too stunned to fathom how Suho could wield such powerful items or summon them seemingly at will. Without a moment's pause, Suho charged forward, fully intent on clearing out the entire pack. His every movement was swift and decisive, cutting down each demon dog with relentless power. Moments later, his system notification appeared, confirming his victory over the steel-tooth Leakin. But Suho didn't pause to celebrate. He was already preparing himself for whatever awaited him next. The comrades left behind could only watch in awe, their spirits lifting as they saw how powerful their young lord had become. But Suho, rather than reveling in the moment, turned back and focused on his next move. Fixing his gaze on the defeated demon dog, he channeled his shadow ability, commanding its shadow to rise. The 3 goblins nearby and his fellow comrades stared in stunned silence, horrified yet mesmerized, as Suho succeeded in summoning the very demon dog he had just felled. Once revived, the demon dog wasted no time. It immediately turned on its former pack members, launching fierce attacks that aided Suho in clearing out the remaining creatures. Beru, observing his little lord's swift mastery of the shadow power, couldn't help but feel proud. Suho, on the other hand, was beginning to grasp that summoning these shadows didn't drain his mana as he'd initially feared. He realized that as his magic power continued to grow, he'd likely be able to summon entire armies, expanding his influence over even larger territories. As he dispatched another demon dog, he turned his attention to the shadow it left behind, raising it to join his ranks. The goblins and his comrade gawked in silent astonishment as Suho repeated the process, this time summoning a third demon dog, each shadow adding to his control. A system notification appeared, announcing that Suho had defeated another steel-tooth Leaken and gained a level, further enhancing his strength. Without missing a beat, Suho summoned the last of the demon wolves he had slain, and older shadow goblins started to disappear. At this point, his comrade could no longer contain his disbelief. Suho, what kind of power is this? This can't possibly be a Ranky ability. How? How can you bring these demonic creatures back to life? Suho hesitated, realizing he may have pushed things too far this time, his abilities inadvertently drawing unwanted attention. He scrambled to explain, turning back with a half-smile and casually saying, "Oh, it's just a unique feature of my Ranky abilities." But his comrade seemed unconvinced, muttering something about how it all seemed far too powerful to be classified as rank E. Could it be that Suho had deliberately registered himself under a lower rank? He wondered aloud, eyeing Suho with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Suho quickly redirected his attention toward the cave entrance, where the demonic creatures had first appeared. Despite the clear path now, he felt a lingering presence and knew there was one enemy left. Scanning the dim cavern, he caught sight of a distant, strange silhouette, a figure that appeared distinctly human but ominously unfamiliar. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was his true opponent, though the exact nature of the threat remained unknown. As Suho and his comrade moved cautiously through the dimly lit cavern, they spotted what seemed to be a familiar face, a member of the capture team. Relief crossed Suho's comrade's face as he stepped forward, calling out, "You survived? How did you escape the ambush?" But the instant the figure turned to face them, his expression shifted ominously, sending a chill down Suho's spine. Realizing something was wrong, Suho yanked his comrade back just as a massive sword whizzed past, slicing close enough to shatter his comrade's glasses. The blade slammed into the ground with a powerful thud, barely missing them. Reacting swiftly, Suho ordered his summoned wolves to attack the crazed hunter without hesitation. The wolves lunged from all sides, each launching itself toward the hostile figure to keep him at bay. Suho seized this moment to drag his comrade further away, explaining as they moved, "That hunter's no longer himself. He's been corrupted, a demon in human skin now. Worse, his name color has turned red, marking him as a high-threat enemy." Suho remembered encountering a red-level creature once before, during the incident at his art university of Korea. The power gap had been severe, and he was all too aware that fighting red-ranked enemies was a daunting challenge. If anything, the sensible option would be to retreat now while they had the chance. Once they put some distance between themselves and the corrupted hunter, Suho turned to Beru, pressing him about what he'd sensed earlier. "Beru, what did you mean when you mentioned sensing the monarch's energy?" Beru frowned thoughtfully and replied, "The hunter carries a faint trace of monarch's essence, though his power doesn't come close to a true monarch's might. But the mere fact he wields that energy makes him a formidable opponent." Suho nodded, taking it all in. He opened his inventory, scanning through his items to come up with a plan. Beru looked at him, concerned. "Little lord, do you really intend to face him?" "Yes," Suho responded, his tone unwavering. "The system assigned me this task for a reason. It's a safeguard designed to push me to my limits and ensure my growth. It means there's a way to overcome this challenge." His determination intensified. "If I ever want to stand a chance against real threats, I need to grow stronger now, not later. Destroying this creature will boost my level, and that's the only way forward." Suho took a deep breath, scanning his inventory and scattering every weapon he had at his disposal onto the ground around him. His determination was absolute. He was ready to face this possessed hunter head-on to secure his victory and strengthen himself. Beside him, Beru watched with admiration, his voice softening as he spoke. "You never back down, no matter the challenge. With each trial you face, you prove yourself as more than just a warrior. Your strength is worthy of a monarch." As the possessed hunter inched closer, Beru pointed out an unusual detail. "The force controlling him, it's bound to that sword. If you can disarm him, he won't be able to attack." With this revelation, Suho signaled his shadow wolves to attack. The wolves moved swiftly, circling the hunter and lunging in from all directions to overwhelm him. One wolf finally managed to clamp its teeth around the hunter's weapon. Watching closely, Suho saw the hunter struggle against the wolf's grip but stay bound to the blade. Buru turned to Suho, explaining, "Your shadow soldiers have an advantage. As long as you supply them with magic, they can regenerate indefinitely." Suho saw the immense potential of his shadow warriors. They were truly a power he could depend on. But even with this insight, he observed how the hunter tore through one of his wolves with a single swing. It was clear his own magic was still lacking compared to the hunter's strength. Then, the hunter's gaze shifted to Suho, his voice dripping with disdain as he mocked, "How could someone like you wield the powers of a shadow monarch?" Suho was taken aback that the hunter could speak, but Beru stepped forward, indignant. "You dare insult one from the shadow monarch's bloodline? Show some respect." The hunter's expression twisted into something dark, and he growled, "Never thought I'd encounter the shadow monarch's kin here." His eyes narrowed, and with a menacing tone, he shouted, "You are an enemy of the Fang monarch." Suho's resolve only hardened. He knew that defeating this hunter would require both his strength and strategy. Without hesitation, Suho gripped his weapon tightly, declaring that it was time to push his abilities to the limit. He launched a rapid series of strikes, targeting both the sword and the hunter in his path. But the hunter skillfully deflected each attack with ease, demonstrating just how formidable a red name opponent could be. Realizing he couldn't overpower the hunter through sheer force, Suho scattered his weapons across the battlefield, shifting his strategy. This time, he chose quantity over precision, unleashing a flurry of attacks from multiple directions. Beru, observing from behind, recognized Suho's innate ruler's power at play, a strength that had been with him since his early years. But even with this newfound approach, the hunter managed to fend off each strike, eventually shattering Suho's weapon with a swift blow. As their eyes met, Suho could see the cold, menacing intent in the hunter's gaze, and he quickly dodged, knowing that a single hit could be his downfall. The hunter, unfazed, taunted him, shouting, "Is this how you fight?" Avoiding every blow, hiding behind shadows like a coward. Suho only smirked, replying, "Your petty insults won't draw me closer. You're more interested in provoking than actually approaching me." The memory of his recent conversation with Beru surfaced. If Suho's seal truly held back his powers, then why hadn't he fully reclaimed his mastery? Beru had explained that Suho's powers had been sealed since his youth, allowing him to rediscover shadow control gradually. Now, facing this hunter, Suho felt his own strength building with every dodge and counter, and he knew he was on the edge of unlocking something even greater. Suho understood that with these powers, he could rival even the mightiest warriors, perhaps even Iterum himself. But this realm wasn't exactly reality, nor was it a dream, it was a trial, designed to see if he could truly wield such powers. Physical strength would fade regardless of success, and Suho realized it was all like a game. The experience in the Tower of Trials hadn't been for nothing. He could vividly recall each sensation, every struggle, and every victory. If only he had something like the iron gloves he once wielded there. Beru's words echoed in his mind. Shadow soldiers were practically indestructible, able to regenerate endlessly so long as magic sustained them. Beru himself could also shift forms when needed. With this flexibility, Suho devised a new plan. Once he had prepared, he summoned his shadow dogs again, but the red hunter laughed as he struck, taunting, "Back to these worthless shadows, Suho? Haven't you realized they're useless against me? I'll slice you down so they won't even dare to approach." Just then, the battlefield shifted as Suho called forth shadows, compressing them into solid matter that enveloped his fists. The red hunter lunged with a powerful strike, an explosion ripping through the air on impact. As the dust cleared, the hunter noticed his attack had been stopped cold. Lowering his gaze, he saw Suho standing firm, fists cloaked in shadow armor, absorbing the blow. "Leaken steel Fang," Suho murmured with a grin, acknowledging the weapon's strength. He glanced at his hands as the notification system confirmed his success. He had unlocked the iron glove transformation. With a newfound confidence, he understood that this skill was exactly what he needed to bring down the hunter for good. The clash between Suho and the red hunter erupted with such force that the very air in the dungeon shifted, becoming charged with tension and raw energy. Watching from behind, Beru's eyes widened in disbelief as he witnessed Suho wielding the weapons of his shadow soldiers. This was no ordinary feat. Only a true shadow monarch, one who had achieved absolute mastery, could command shadows with such precision. Yet, here was Suho, who seemed like a novice just discovering the depths of shadow power, managing to unlock abilities even Beru himself had never known existed. The way he handled his newly gained shadow powers, fluid and flawless, was nothing short of remarkable. His martial arts were refined, his movements precise. Without guidance or instruction, Suho had tapped into the very essence of ruler power and had made it his own. Beru's admiration grew with every move Suho made. Just as the Red Hunter lunged forward, Suho threw him against the dungeon wall with a powerful strike, causing an eruption of shattered stone and dust. Yet, the Red Hunter was not so easily defeated. With a roar, he staggered back to his feet, screaming in defiance. But Suho was undeterred. His weapon sailed through the air with unerring precision, aimed directly at the Red Hunter. In that moment, Beru understood how far his little lord had come, marveling at Suho's rapid growth and natural genius. Once Suho delivered the final blow, the Red Hunter grudgingly admitted defeat, muttering that he'd thought his power was invincible with his notorious red title. But now, it was evident that his reign had come to an end. Beru, who had silently believed in Suho's victory all along, congratulated him with a subtle nod. As Suho raised his hand, a realization dawned on him. He'd intuitively adopted a new, powerful combat technique throughout this intense encounter. With the fight concluded, Suho turned to his rewards. The notification system, ever-present and efficient, offered him the choice to accept his quest prizes. Suho agreed, and the rewards appeared before him in quick succession. His first reward was a rune stone inscribed with the power of the Storm Strike technique, and the second was mastery over the very skill itself. The power of Storm Strike now coursed through him, marking yet another step in Suho's ever-evolving strength. In that instant, a radiant blue aura surged around Suho, illuminating him with an ethereal glow. He sensed immediately that this new skill was an invaluable gift, one many would envy. Yet, with an intuitive grasp, he already understood how to wield it, as if the knowledge had been etched directly into his mind. Deciding to make the most of the time he had, Suho prepared to test his newfound power. Looking down, his gaze fell on a weapon at his feet. A voice echoed in the air, mocking the Red Hunter's failures and calling it all the result of unbridled human greed. But Suho paid little attention to the taunt, focused instead on the powerful weapon before him. Sword thought. It can take control of Suho's body, but as he lifted it, the notification system chimed, revealing that he had obtained a new item, the Rakan's Fang. It was an elegant, formidable blade, far superior to the crude goblin sword he'd wielded in his early days within the dungeons. However, he could still feel the remnants of the sword's own will, as though the weapon were astonished that someone had inherited it yet resisted its control. With everything set, Suho began training with his new sword, sending devastating swings in every direction and pulverizing the rocks around him. Testing the strength of his Storm Strike skill, he noticed the hefty drain it placed on his mana reserves. Even so, the sheer impact and power thrilled him. Reflecting, Suho mentioned to Beru how different this felt compared to shadow manipulation alone. Beru, declaring that shadow power, in its rawest form, was magnitudes, thousands of times, stronger. As he swung the Rakan's Fang for the last time, he noticed movement in the distance. His companions, slowly coming back to their senses, began to stir and approached him. He, disoriented, blinked at the sight of the Red Hunter lying defeated nearby and looked to Suho with a questioning expression. Suho reassured them, saying he'd explain everything, but that it was best to discuss it outside the dungeon. With that, the hunters and workers started their journey back, moving toward the portal and finally leaving the scene of their fierce battle. As Suho's comrade settled onto a nearby bench, he looked at Suho with curiosity and asked what he planned to do next. Suho responded calmly, stating that he intended to search the dungeon for any remaining survivors. His comrade watched as Suho walked back into the ominous dungeon depths, astonished by the strength Suho now displayed. How had he grown so powerful, and was he truly able to summon in such a high-stakes situation? It seemed unbelievable. But in that moment, none of those questions really mattered. What mattered was that, thanks to Suho, the survivors were safe. Families and friends were reunited outside the dungeon, grateful and bewildered, many not fully grasping what they'd endured. Meanwhile, deep within the dungeon, Suho was already in action, cutting down iron demon hounds with precise, relentless strikes. After dispatching a group of them, he turned to Beru, noting that there still seemed to be an endless number of wolf-like monsters prowling within the shadows. Beru chuckled, reminding Suho that every one of them counted as experience and should be taken advantage of. As he continued to fight, Suho noticed that his sword's attack power had diminished. Just then, a voice emanated from within the weapon, attributing the power drop to the sword's alliance with the Shadow Lord's heir. Beru quickly retorted, saying it was a shameful display for such a proud weapon to diminish its power simply because Suho, someone much stronger, was wielding it. The sword's voice argued back, claiming that it had never witnessed a true hunter wasting effort on prey so weak. Beru countered, pointing out that Suho had already bested foes far mightier than the sword itself, leaving the voice momentarily silent. Suho paused, momentarily struck by the strange reality that he was conversing with both a talking insect and a sentient sword. It was surreal, but he pushed on, reaching the very place where he had originally retrieved the sword. Observing his surroundings, he discovered a grim scene. All of the hunters who had been in that area had been utterly wiped out. Just then, the sword's voice echoed ominously, stating that anyone who dared enter this space would face destruction. The sword pulsed with an ancient resolve as it spoke, "My duty is to guard the sanctuary of the Fang monarch." However, Suho, ignoring its words, gripped the weapon firmly and thrust it back into the slot from which it had been removed. Turning his attention elsewhere, he gazed solemnly at the fallen hunters around him. Suddenly, a notification flashed before him, alerting him to a target eligible for shadow extraction and asking if he wished to proceed. Suho hesitated and turned to Beru, questioning if it was truly possible to use shadow extraction on humans. Beru confirmed, explaining that as long as the body was dead, any creature, human or otherwise, could be converted into a shadow soldier. But instead of taking the opportunity, Suho quietly began lifting the remains of the hunters, carrying them carefully towards the dungeon's exit. Perplexed, Beru watched, unsure why Suho was refraining from utilizing shadow extraction. When he asked, Suho simply replied that binding someone to fight after death felt too close to punishment. Beru was taken aback by this response. He hadn't expected such a choice from his young master. The respect Suho showed even in battle left Beru stunned. Then, Suho asked another question, confirming with Beru that this place was indeed a sanctuary for the Fang monarch. Beru nodded and went on to explain further. Suho mused aloud about his father and how the defeated lord, whom he had confronted earlier, was somehow entangled with a group known as the Teetering. Beru took a moment and then elaborated, "The Teetering are current enemies of the Shadow Monarch. But other monarchs are the past enemies." Beru continued, detailing the 9 great monarchs, each of whom was powerful beyond imagination. Among them was Suho's father, Sung Jinwoo, the king of death and monarch of shadows, a revered protector who had saved the world countless times. Beru recited their titles with solemn respect: the Beast King, also known as the Fang monarch, who wielded a power equal to any of the monarchs, the Queen of Insects, the Plague monarch, the iron-bodied monarch of monstrous humanoids, the King of Demons, known as the Monarch of White Flames, the Colossal Giant Monarch, Lord of the Beginning, the Frost Monarch, ruler of the Snowfolk, the Monarch of Transfiguration, sovereign over spectral demons, and finally, the Berserk Dragon King, Monarch of Destruction. 8 of these monarchs had fallen when they sought to conquer Earth, leaving only Sung Jinwoo, the Shadow Monarch, victorious over them all. And it was this same Shadow Monarch who had defeated the Fang monarch, Suho's current opponent. As the tales of the past hung heavily in the air, the sword's voice growled with malice. "Were my power restored," it sneered, "I'd rip apart the descendant of the Shadow Monarch's bloodline and toss him to the wolves for sport." Suho regarded the sword with a measured gaze, addressing the voice within. "It's not that I don't understand your perspective," he began. "But my father defeated the other monarchs to protect this world. His only goal was to shield it from destruction. In the same way, aren't you here to guard this place from invaders? Whatever side we stand on, we're both simply defending what matters to us. You wish to fight me purely because of our blood connection, but that seems pointless if your mission is to defend this sanctuary." He paused, then added, "I want nothing more than to meet my parents, those whom I can't see because of past invasions. For that purpose, I'm willing to draw on any strength. When the Teetering come again, even this place won't remain safe. If you aid me, together we can protect both this sanctuary and our world." The spirit within the sword fell silent, contemplating Suho's unexpected proposition. Could this young heir of the Shadow Lord truly mean to join forces? Suho grasped the sword's hilt firmly, waiting to see if it would submit to his resolve, prepared to unite shadows and fangs in a common cause. For a moment, an aura of understanding seemed to pass between them, as though the sword were weighing Suho's words deeply. Meanwhile, in a bustling cafe, a group of reporters gathered with several of Suho's friends, eager for any first-hand account of the previous day's harrowing dungeon incident. They had been keen to speak to anyone who could give them the full story, and one of the survivors, Lim Dog-yoon, who still bore signs of exhaustion, took the opportunity to share his experience. Holding his coffee, he addressed the reporters, wanting to bring attention to Suho's bravery, despite his rank as an E-class hunter. "It's important people hear what happened," Lim said. He detailed how Suho had stepped forward without hesitation to protect the others, painting a picture of courage that would be hard to overlook. The reporters listened closely, capturing every word to relay in the next headline. Not long after, articles began circulating, highlighting the unlikely hero, a rank E hunter who had shielded his fellow hunters from certain doom. The reports recounted Suho's selfless stand against the dungeon monsters, featuring interviews from many survivors who owed their lives to him. Elsewhere, editors and writers gathered to discuss their next steps, pens tapping thoughtfully as they selected the best story angles to bring this extraordinary event to the public. Suho's resolve had begun to echo far beyond the dungeon walls, giving rise to a story of heroism that would inspire many more. In a bustling guild management office, murmurs filled the room as the team discussed recent staffing needs. One of the assistants noted that the intel department was short-handed and would benefit from hiring a few additional E-rank hunters. The second-in-command, seated at the main desk, quickly agreed, instructing his colleague to find a suitable candidate. The man at the computer scanned through profiles, stopping at one that caught his attention, an E-rank hunter who had recently faced down monsters in a dungeon, coordinated the evacuation of a minor team, and single-handedly rescued an injured hunter. Upon realizing the candidate's rank, those around him were visibly surprised. But the second-in-command merely shrugged, assuring them, "Don't be so quick to judge. Bringing him into a high-ranking guild like ours could be beneficial. It wouldn't hurt to have him here and resolve a minor scandal or two." A staffer then inquired if Hunter Suho had responded to their initial outreach. The mention of Suho's name drew interest, particularly because they had learned he'd received an invitation from the prestigious Black Turtles Guild. He must be thrilled, one of them assumed. However, the colleague at the desk turned, stating, "Actually, Suho declined the offer." The second-in-command blinked in disbelief. Declined? An E-rank rookie refusing a guild like that? What's he thinking? He shook his head, grumbling. Does he believe he's some kind of S-rank hunter? It doesn't make any sense. Another staffer chimed in. Apparently, Suho has no interest in joining any guild. The leader's irritation deepened, unable to grasp how a rookie with such a low rank could afford to pass up such opportunities. "Mark my words, he'll come around," he muttered. "Sooner or later, Suho will realize how challenging it is to survive without a guild support." Meanwhile, back at his apartment, Suho checked the notifications popping up on his phone. Since his last dungeon expedition, he had been inundated with guild invitations. A flood of offers filled Suho's inbox, though he noticed that nearly every guild wanted him for menial roles as a porter or gatherer. He couldn't quite understand the overwhelming interest, but he dismissed the offers. To him, joining these guilds would only limit his potential and slow his progress with the system. There was simply no reason to waste time on tasks that would sidetrack his path to growth. Turning his focus to his sword, Suho looked at Fong Raken. "About what we discussed in the dungeon," he began, combining Shadow and Fong. "Are you still open to that?" Fong Raken's voice responded skeptically, clearly stunned. "Are you serious? You think a Shadow can become a true ally and not an adversary?" After a pause, he added, "But there is one condition, take me to another of the Fong Monarch's sacred lands." Suho raised an eyebrow. "You know where to find it?" Fong Raken replied confidently, "I know the locations of all the Fong Monarch's holy sites, regardless of distance. But there's a problem, a gate leading to one of them has already vanished. It's most likely undergone a dungeon breach." Realization struck Suho. This holy ground must now be an open dungeon, a place where vicious, powerful monsters roam freely. Once a breach forms, creatures spill out, transforming the area into a desolate wasteland. Gripping his phone, Suho quickly messaged his uncle, saying he'd be unreachable for a while and not to worry. He knew he needed to seize this chance to gain strength and elevate his level as rapidly as possible. Later, Suho glanced over at Beru, asking if they were close. Beru nodded. "Yes, we're here." But in the parking lot, they immediately spotted signs prohibiting entry. Suho noticed that the Hyena Guild, a notorious group known for recruiting former gang members, had claimed the area, adding a layer of tension. Understanding that a direct approach might be met with hostility, Suho steeled himself, ready for whatever awaited him beyond the barrier. Beru advised Suho to ignore the petty creatures and focus on leveling up. As Beru and Fong bickered, Suho cut them off, irritated, demanding to know what they were doing. He stated he was ready to break in and would use his powers to make it happen. With that, he began shattering the surveillance cameras one by one. Beru questioned what would happen if the guild noticed, but Suho confidently responded that he had a plan for that. When he broke the final camera, it shattered into tiny fragments, ensuring there'd be no evidence. Beru observed with amusement, noting that Suho's approach reminded him of the Monarch. Upon entering, Suho was struck by the eerie, blue mist filling the open dungeon. Beru explained that this mist was actually mana from another realm, seeping through dimensional walls and leaving a trail. The mist originated from the Monarch's sanctum, filtering to Earth through a dimensional rift. Beru continued, revealing that beings from the outer worlds were trying to tear a large breach between realms to send their armies through. Due to the dense concentration of mana required, only the weaker creatures could currently slip through, the strongest forces hadn't arrived yet. Realizing the urgency, Suho knew he had to level up fast, especially before other hunters could interfere. Suddenly, he glanced up and noticed colossal creatures lurking in the trees, a sharp-clawed Briga and a shadowy figure known as Ramon. Fong eagerly encouraged Suho to unleash his strength, but Suho replied that while he appreciated the support, he wouldn't use Fong as his main weapon, leaving Fong momentarily puzzled. Suho had decided to take a different approach, one he had thought through carefully. Instead of relying solely on weapons, he would integrate his training by using his fists for mid-range combat, with his monarchical powers as a backup. To keep his tactics versatile, he would swap weapons as needed, employing his extraction ability to gain more gear and further enhance his skills and attributes, leveling up independently. Hearing this, Beru was thrilled with the young monarch's determination and strategy. Fong recognized that this was the true power of the Shadow Monarch's bloodline at play. The more adversaries Suho faced and the longer a battle endured, the stronger he grew, drawing strength from the very demons and monsters he defeated. With his heightened intelligence, Suho realized he could now summon 5 shadows. However, Beru was quick to point out that it was a far cry from the mighty monarch, who could command thousands. Embarrassed, Suho told Beru to keep quiet. As they ventured further into the forest, Suho noticed a peculiar building in place of the Holy Land's gate Fong had mentioned. Fong explained that this was indeed where the gate was supposed to be, but now a strange warehouse stood in its place. Suho observed people still bustling about the area despite the late hour, wondering what was keeping them out here at night when hunting was typically safer during the day. Just then, a vehicle arrived, and several individuals were escorted out, their hands and legs bound. Realizing he was witnessing a kidnapping, Suho felt a surge of anger. Beru suggested caution, reminding Suho that, being here illegally, they would be vulnerable if these hunters realized they were trespassing. But as Beru finished his warning and turned, he found that Suho had vanished. Surprised, Beru wondered if Suho was seriously about to engage with those people. With a background of justice ingrained in him by his father, a dedicated police officer in violent crimes, and his legendary firefighter grandfather, Suho couldn't stand by idly. Acting on instinct, he dashed forward, closing the distance in an instant, and with a powerful kick, struck the nearest hunter, sending him reeling. The shadows watching were stunned by Suho's decisiveness. The other hunters, seeing their comrade taken down by a single, unexpected strike, were equally astonished. After the forceful kick, the hunter's face smashed into the ground, and the others only saw a fleeting shadow, the silhouette of Suho. The hunters couldn't immediately tell who had attacked, but Suho quickly assessed the situation, realizing that his body had reacted faster than his thoughts. Realizing he had unintentionally invaded another guild's territory, Suho wasn't entirely sure of his next move. He slipped on his shadow mask and turned to confront them, asking, "Are you seriously kidnapping people? What exactly is your guild, Hyena, up to?" The other hunters, surprised and angered, demanded to know why he was trespassing and attacking them without warning. They taunted, claiming he had sealed his fate by intruding, as they readied their weapons and began channeling their magic to retaliate. One of the hunters lunged toward Suho, but Suho skillfully dodged each blow. He recalled what he knew of the Hyena Guild. Their average strength hovered around D rank, so he resolved to stay on guard, not underestimating his opponents. When Suho struck one of the hunters, he put all his strength into the hit, sending the man flying through the air. The others watched, stunned by how swiftly their comrade had been thrown aside, and they could hardly believe what was happening. But Suho didn't hesitate. He moved on to the next hunter, taking them down one by one as they came at him from all directions. Beru, watching intently, was astounded, realizing that these D-rank awakened ones, who were fairly powerful by human standards, were now no match for Suho. Glancing at his status, Suho noted his progress. He had now reached level 16. Once the last hunter was subdued, Suho tied them up tightly to prevent any escape. Satisfied, he turned his attention to the people who had been bound by the guild and began untying them. As they were freed, they expressed their deep gratitude to Suho for rescuing them, while Beru, watching the aftermath, couldn't help but comment on the graceful way his young monarch had wrapped up the battle. The freed captives, uncertain but curious, asked Suho if he was part of the Hunter Association. He nodded and said they could assume so, instructing them to get to safety while he handled the situation here. Once they hurriedly got into their car and drove off, Suho lingered, puzzled about why the Hyena Guild would go to such extremes as to kidnap people. Just then, Fong's voice echoed in his mind, saying he could sense something nearby. Intrigued, Suho asked what Fong meant, and Fong hinted that this was the reason he had insisted on coming here in the first place. Suho and his companions moved toward a building on the other side of the fence. Entering the dimly lit room, Suho was taken aback by what he found. Rows of cages lined the walls, and a faint, strange energy filled the space, barely noticeable yet present. Beru pointed this out as well, though the source of the energy was difficult to pinpoint. As Suho scanned the room, his gaze settled on a small creature locked in one of the nearby cages. Initially, he thought it was a mere dog, but Fang quickly corrected him, suggesting that the creature was, in fact, a young wolf, a descendant of the legendary beast monarch, Fang. Hearing this revelation, Suho could hardly believe his ears. Fang then elaborated, explaining that after a brutal conflict with the Shadow Monarch, the beast monarch Fang had given the order for the last of his bloodline to be hidden in a shrine. He had hoped that one day, if his lineage survived, another Fang monarch might rise. Fang admitted that he hadn't expected to find a Fang descendant here of all places. Moved by the story and the little wolf's plight, Suho broke open the cage and gently lifted the wolf cub into his arms, feeling the faint traces of a noble aura that had suffered greatly and was almost depleted. Fang warned him that the young wolf's energy was so low it wouldn't survive if left in its weakened state. Beru then asked Suho what he planned to do next. Suho, eyes blazing with newfound resolve, muttered that while he had expected to find a few minor figures here, he now understood there was one last foe he would have to deal with. At that moment, Suho sensed a twisted aura. Turning, he spotted a demonic figure emerging from the shadows, its voice dripping with malice as it sneered that trust in others was a futile sentiment. The creature introduced itself as Brokey and claimed to have survived by any means necessary. Instantly, Suho asked Fang if he knew this creature. Fang confirmed, explaining that this was the guard responsible for taking care of the descendant he had just described. Brokey smirked as he approached Fang, sneering that it had been ages since they last saw each other and taunting Fang Rakan by mentioning how glad he was to see him still alive. Fang's expression grew darker, and he responded sharply, reminding Brokey of his duty to protect the descendant. All this time, while this wolf cub was in chains, what exactly were you doing, Brokey? Fang demanded, his voice thick with contempt. Suho held the wolf cub protectively, but before he could react, Brokey lunged at him with blinding speed. With a menacing glare, Brokey growled, "How dare you touch what's mine?" Without warning, Brokey swung his tail, striking Suho with a brutal force that sent him crashing through the wall and into a pile of containers outside. Beru, witnessing the violent impact, flew to Suho's side, shouting out to see if he was all right. Dazed and wincing, Suho managed to grin despite his injuries, muttering, "That's the hardest hit I've taken in a long time. And yes, I'm bleeding, so please, Beru, stop yelling. My head's throbbing enough without the extra noise." Beru nodded, then looked toward Brokey, narrowing his gaze. "I sensed a lingering energy when I arrived here," Beru said. "It's Iterim's energy, unmistakably connected to this one." His words caught both Fang and Brokey's attention. Turning to Brokey, Beru asked, "Do you realize what you've done to the monarch's descendant?" Brokey interrupted with a twisted laugh, explaining smugly that his strength was no mere coincidence. "Even after losing my sanctuary, I've grown strong by following nature's law of survival. The weak feed the strong, it's the way of the world," he declared coldly. "This cub, though weak, carries the bloodline of the Fang monarch, making him an ideal source of power." Brokey then admitted to draining energy from the young wolf periodically, using him as nourishment to amplify his own strength. After relishing his explanation, Brokey fixed his eyes on Fang with a malevolent grin. "When I'm finished here," he vowed, "I'll be strong enough to eliminate you too, Fang. Mark my words." Suho raised his hand, calmly stating, "Death is merely the result of weakness," but Brokey cut him off, sneering. "Strength is the only law that matters. Only the powerful are fit to endure," he said, casting an assessing glance at Suho as he boasted about how the next Fang monarch would only respect strength. Seizing the moment, Suho lunged forward with his sword, delivering a fierce blow. At the same time, Beru swooped in, swiftly lifting the wolf cub from harm's way and retreating to a safer distance. As Suho's blade found its mark, it returned to his hand, poised for another strike. Glancing at Fang, Suho added, "I thought you were upset with me. But right now, we're on the same side. I have unfinished business with this one, too." The tension between Fang and Shadow Clan felt almost tangible, but Suho's focus held. He continued, "This battle may bring me closer to my father's trail." Just then, Suho's system chimed with a new assignment, an urgent hyena hunt, tasking him with stopping this threat and ensuring public safety. He connected the dots, realizing the true meaning behind the hyena guild's name. Brokey wasn't simply another monster, he had founded an entire organization, kidnapping people to grow his influence, all intertwined with the same sinister energy linked to Iterim. The hunters nearby, once loyal to Brokey, struggled against their restraints. "Brokey, release us," they yelled. "This guy isn't someone to face alone. Let us help." but Brokey turned on his own followers in a heartbeat, silencing them with a brutal, dismissive blow. "You think I need help with him?" he snarled. "The minute you forget your place, you become prey." Witnessing Brokey's merciless strike against his own people ignited Suho's fury. He charged forward, fist clenched and ready to strike. As he launched his sword, Brokey countered instantly, blocking with an unyielding grip. Suho demanded, "Did you slaughter those people just for amusement?" Brokey's response was cold. "The strong need no reason. We decide who lives and dies, as we see fit." Brokey followed with another powerful swing, but Suho managed to dodge just in time, shifting to the side and steadying himself, more determined than ever to bring down the monster before him. Launching himself into the air, Suho dove down at Brokey with a fierce determination, his body descending like a storm. Mid-flight, he activated his recently acquired skill, Storm Blade, summoning gusts of slicing wind around his weapon. But as Suho's attacks rained down, Brokey barely flinched. Smirking, he sneered, "Is that it? You're not even close to honoring the name of the Fang heirloom." Just then, a blade came whizzing through the air from a different angle, catching Brokey by surprise as it sliced close to him. Suho, standing a few steps back, extended his arm, revealing his control over the flying sword. "We're just getting started," he warned. Fang, watching closely, took the chance to question Brokey. "What happened to you? You once pledged loyalty to Rakan with such pride. Why betray that oath?" Brokey's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing as he responded. "Loyalty?" He scoffed, letting out a cold laugh. "There was never honor, only fear. I respected Rakan's power, nothing more. Living like that, shackled by fear, I couldn't bear it any longer. So, when the chance came, I decided to seize my own future by any means necessary." Brokey caught Fang, and destroyed it. With a sudden burst of speed, he struck Suho with a devastating punch, sending him reeling. Suho felt pain tear through his body as if every bone were fractured, but his mind latched onto a powerful memory. Images of his father flashed before him, a figure battling somewhere unknown, never backing down. That memory rekindled a strength within Suho. It reminded him that surrender was not an option. Steeling himself, he summoned the shadows around him, cloaking his fists in shadowy armor. Channeling all his remaining strength, he launched a powerful blow straight into Brokey, determination blazing in his eyes. Watching from a distance, Beru marveled at his young lord's resilience and power. Despite his age, Suho was wielding strength beyond what anyone expected. Fang, lying battered on the ground, glanced at his shattered sword and the memory of its former power. Everything, the survival of his descendants, the future of the Fang lineage, all rested on Suho's shoulders now. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. Fang could sense that Suho, just like him, was ready for the battle still to come. At that moment, the young wolf cub began to stir, slowly rising to its feet despite the strain and pain it felt. Fang Rakan watched, understanding that this cub, the last descendant of Lord Rakan, was summoning the strength to stand. Inspired by Suho's fierce determination, the cub struggled to its paws, its resolve mirroring Suho's own. Realizing what he had to do, Fang Rakan thought, "The least I can do now is offer the remainder of my power to the next generation." As Suho continued his fight, each clash echoing through the battlefield, he barely held off his opponent's relentless onslaught. With a powerful strike, Brokey sent him crashing to the ground. Lifting his head with difficulty, Suho noticed a system notification displaying his remaining hit points. The monster loomed closer, radiating an ominous aura and taunting, impressive endurance for such a lowly creature. Brokey raised his arm to deliver a finishing blow, but suddenly, a sharp set of claws swiped across his paw. The young wolf cub had intervened, striking just as Brokey was about to end Suho. Suho blinked, surprised by the wolf's sudden appearance and courage. Standing firm, the cub positioned itself protectively in front of Suho, its eyes blazing with determination. A notification appeared in front of Suho, showing that the Fang descendant had acknowledged his bravery and offered to join him as an ally. Suho hesitated, uncertain. Is this little cub really the descendant of the Fang? The monster, equally shocked, glared at the cub, snarling, "Is that truly a descendant? Has he absorbed the power of Rakan Fang?" At that moment, Suho pieced it together. The cub had inherited the essence of Rakan Fang, who must have sacrificed himself to infuse his power into this young wolf. Suho had intended to align with the Fang from the start, and after a quick look at the system's notification, he decided there was no reason to hesitate. Accepting the Fang descendant as an ally, he confirmed the bond. Almost immediately, a new system window appeared, indicating that data synchronization was underway. Suho felt a strange influx of energy, memory seeping into his mind as if he were tapping directly into the wolf cub's past. The images formed into fragmented memories, an ominous cave, where Brokey told Fang's descendant that they lost the war to Shadow Monarch and he must become stronger. Soon after, shadowed figures gathered around a small, trembling wolf cub. Among them, Suho saw beings vowing to challenge the powerful lord, declaring that the survival of the fittest ruled their world. The Fang clan member asserted that, no matter the risk, they would grow stronger to secure a future for their kind. As one figure extended a hand, the little cub cowered, and a creature laid a hand on the cub's head, transferring some mysterious energy while muttering, "I choose you. Use this power wisely, it's a gift that will help you survive, depending on your resolve." The memory then shifted as Brokey's sinister plot came into focus, his henchmen tasked with capturing people alive and delivering them to fulfill the monster's twisted purposes. The memories showed how Brokey, fueled by power, fell further into darkness, and how the little wolf grew more fearful with every passing day. Witnessing the memories, Suho realized that these beings, who marked the wolf's mind with such fear, were somehow linked to the dark force of Teetering. The Fang descendants' motivations were clear to Suho now. The cub didn't simply want revenge on Brokey but hoped to stop him entirely. Determined, Suho recognized that if Brokey's actions were tied to Teetering, he had to end this here and now. But he knew he wasn't strong enough to do it alone, not yet. As if in response, the notification system updated, presenting Suho with a new quest, Monarch's Descendants Quest. The details urged him to find the Monarch's heirs and forge alliances with them. This would be the first step toward strengthening his position and securing allies in the battle against darkness. The Monarch's Descendants Quest demanded 8 alliances, with the first already forming through Suho's connection to Fang's lineage. As Suho acknowledged this bond, a vivid blue aura enveloped him, intensifying with each passing second. Beru, watching intently, noticed that his young lord was undergoing a transformation unlike any before. Meanwhile, Brokey grew tense, bewildered by the strange surge of power emanating from Suho. Driven by desperation, Brokey launched himself at Suho, intending to end it all in one decisive blow. He struck with such force that the ground around them began to crumble, sending shockwaves through the air. But just as Brokey's blow landed, the system flashed another notification, confirming that a skill had awakened through Suho's bond with the Fang descendant. Suho had activated a level 1 beast transformation, a bonding skill that consumed 1 mana per second. This skill infused his body with the descendant's essence, enhancing his physical power and awakening heightened, animal-like senses. For a moment, Suho struggled to grasp what was happening. His body felt feather-light yet powerful, his senses keener than ever. The world around him seemed sharper, each detail vividly clear, and his movements flowed effortlessly as he instinctively avoided Brokey's assaults. Then, in a sudden counterstrike, Suho unleashed a powerful kick, sending Brokey reeling. Stunned, Brokey struggled to process how this human, who had been on the defensive moments ago, now moved with such swiftness and strength. Enraged and confused, Brokey roared, insisting he could not be losing to the same mere mortal he had dominated minutes prior. This power was supposed to belong only to him. He had fought, sacrificed, and clawed his way to the strength he wielded. In the background, Beru looked on in awe, sensing the drastic increase in Brokey's magical aura. Furious, Brokey spat, "I don't know what trick you're using, human, but I won't fall to the likes of you. Strength defines the right to rule, and you'll regret being born a weak creature of your kind." But Suho only narrowed his gaze, his new strength urging him forward, determined to prove Brokey's arrogance would be his undoing. At this moment, Suho activated a new skill, quickly picking up techniques for hand-to-hand combat. Nearby, Beru's expression darkened in irritation as he overheard Brokey, the beast, boast about the difference between their species. To Beru, nothing and no one stood above a shadow monarch, and this arrogant creature needed to be silenced. When Brokey heard this, a flicker of doubt passed over him. Could this young human truly be a shadow lord? Before he could fully process this, Suho dashed forward and delivered a precise, unyielding kick, driving Brokey deep into the earth. Yet even with his body battered and strength failing, Brokey clung to his single-minded obsession. He had to keep getting stronger. Nothing else mattered. With fading vision, he glimpsed a familiar figure, Rakan, his master. Regret seeped in as Brokey chastised himself for failing to protect Rakan, the one who had once entrusted him with so much. At last, the little wolf, recognizing his old friend's end, raised a mournful howl to the sky, saying his final goodbye to Brokey. Suho observed the fallen Brokey, a notification informing him that he had leveled up from the victory. He glanced over to see the little wolf gazing sorrowfully at Brokey's lifeless form, saddened by the realization that he'd had to confront and ultimately lose someone who had once been his guardian. The silence was thick, and both Suho and Beru stood quietly for a moment, respectfully watching the somber scene unfold. Finally, Beru broke the silence, commending Suho for his strength and skill in taking down Brokey. Suho, however, remained focused and asked Beru if he sensed any trace of Iterim's power lingering nearby. Suho shared that, through his bond with Rakan's heir, he had glimpsed troubling memories. He described a scene in which hunters had attacked Brokey and the little wolf, inflicting a strange curse upon Brokey's eye that had twisted his mind, turning him against his own. Could these hunters be agents of Iterim? Suho wondered aloud, his gaze darkening. And what could their real purpose be? Hearing this, Beru frowned and replied, Iterim are the outer gods. These types don't involve themselves directly with mortal affairs. They send apostles to handle their errands and impose their will from afar. But one thing is certain, if hunters aligned with Iterim are acting openly here, then Earth is already part of their plans. Suho was still puzzled, desperate to learn more about Iterim. Beru, noticing his curiosity, suggested a way they might glean some insight into Iterim's secrets. Suho looked at him, surprised, as Beru explained, if I devour Brokey's body, I could access his memories, plus, I'd regain some of my powers. Think of it as getting 2 rewards in one. Suho, bewildered, asked Beru when he acquired this kind of ability. Then, he glanced at Rakan's heir, who was observing the exchange, clearly uncertain. Sensing the wolf's sadness, Suho knelt down and asked if he'd like to stay with him or if he preferred a different place. The young wolf initially hesitated, but when Suho smiled, the tension faded. The wolf bounded forward, nuzzling Suho affectionately, his eyes full of trust. Deciding on their next step, Suho pulled out his shadow dungeon key, opening a portal. Beru, I'm counting on you to find information on Iterim, he said, motioning for Beru to handle Brokey's remains. While Beru devoured Brokey's corpse with enthusiasm, Suho led the wolf through the shadow dungeon portal, explaining that he wanted a safe haven for him. Beru chuckled to himself, wondering why Suho was bothering with the dungeon instead of just staying home. Inside the dungeon, Suho looked at his wolf companion, thoughtful yet concerned. This space belonged to the Shadow Monarch, and bringing in a creature connected to a different lineage might lead to complications. Beru raised an eyebrow, astonished at Suho's choice to house Rakan's heir in the Shadow Domain. Then, out of nowhere, a system notification appeared, indicating that the wolf wanted Suho to give him a name. Suho, taken by surprise, realized he'd never named anything before. But seeing the wolf's trusting gaze, he understood it would be an honor, and a responsibility, to give him a name worthy of their bond. When the wolf asked for a name, without any hesitation, Suho settled on the name Gray for the wolf, inspired by his striking gray fur. Beru, however, was less than impressed by Suho's choice, disappointed by what he deemed a lackluster name. But to Suho's surprise, the wolf seemed overjoyed with the name and wagged his tail enthusiastically. The system then notified Suho that Gray had officially become one of his allies, and their trust level had increased. The system also designated a portion of the Shadow Dungeon as Gray's new territory. Suho, still concerned about his new companion, wondered aloud what Gray would eat in the dungeon. Beru assured him not to worry, mentioning that Gray, coming from a well-established bloodline, would manage just fine by hunting the monsters still roaming in the dungeon. This explanation put Suho at ease, especially knowing that a few monsters had survived from his last visit. Gray, thrilled with his new home, eagerly began his hunt, quickly proving his worth by attacking a goblin with a single strike, effortlessly killing it. Meanwhile, Suho and Beru sat on a tree branch, quietly watching as Gray hunted down multiple goblins. Suho couldn't help but marvel at how swiftly Gray adapted to his powers, despite being so new to them. Just then, a system notification appeared, informing Suho that he had earned the title of Wolf Slaughterer for defeating Brokey, and had gained additional ability points. Suho was a bit confused, as he had always thought of Brokey as a hyena, not a wolf. Beru, sensing Suho's confusion, urged him not to focus too much on the strange title, suggesting he should be proud of the recognition instead. Suho nodded but couldn't shake off his uncertainty, especially regarding the mysterious quest he had been given to find the heirs of all the monarchs. Beru explained that the system was often cryptic in its methods, designed to make Suho stronger, but also warned that it might have an ulterior motive. Suho, still not fully grasping the gravity of Beru's words, asked for further clarification. Beru sighed, recalling his own experiences. He explained that in his father's system, the architect had planned to make Sung Jinwoo into a shadow monarch. The intention had been to crush his soul in the process, turning him into a mere puppet for the old shadow monarch's use. This revelation left Suho in deep thought, aware that the system's true purpose could be far more complex and dangerous than he initially realized. Yet, Sung Jinwoo defied the system's intentions, ultimately conquering it rather than letting it dominate him. He achieved the rank of Shadow Monarch while maintaining his autonomy and developed his power without being dependent on the system's levels. but explained that this new system is designed for Suho, removed all ill intentions. Taking Beru's words to heart, Suho pondered if the system might be attempting to groom him for a similar role. When he voiced this suspicion, Beru responded cautiously, noting that only one true Shadow Monarch could exist. Nevertheless, he speculated that the system would continue guiding Suho toward an unknown purpose, one that would reveal itself in time. Reflecting on this, Suho accessed his status window and noticed that, despite significant growth and powerful skills acquired since his battles with the Mistburns, his class still appeared none. This dissonance gnawed at him. He knew he wouldn't have overcome Brokey without Gray's crucial help. Resolving to follow the system's quests as long as they aligned with his personal ambitions, Suho leapt down from the tree, curious to hear Beru's findings from consuming Brokey's body. Beru reported that, while he hadn't uncovered evidence of any apostles directly brainwashing Brokey, he'd found that a human guild called Grim Reaper was involved. This guild was working behind the scenes with the Hyena Guild, aiding in the capture and delivery of people to Brokey. Beru suggested that tracking down the Grim Reaper Guild might yield crucial insights into Iterim's true intentions. The revelation stunned Suho, as he realized another guild's sinister involvement only added to the complexity of the situation. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to a well-dressed man in an opulent office, calmly answering a phone call. He was speaking to Tegu, who seemed to be mid-raid. Tegu confronted the man, demanding to know about his potential involvement in the recent chaos surrounding the Hyena Guild. The man, unbothered, flatly dismissed Tegu's insinuations, claiming that he had no proof to back up his suspicions. Tegu warned him that the Hunter Association wouldn't rest until they uncovered the truth, suggesting that the man should clean up his operations. Incensed by Tegu's defiance, the man slammed his fist onto the desk, splintering the polished surface in a burst of rage. It was then revealed that this man held the position of vice CEO in the Grim Reaper Guild. With a sly grin, he drew out a shimmering pearl, an awakening stimulant known as stardust, which hunters could use to amplify their powers. As he examined it, he mused on how this rare substance could become a lucrative asset in expanding his influence. Meanwhile, in the Shadow Dungeon, Gray was tearing through goblins with ease, his strength advancing at an astonishing rate. Each strike was more powerful and precise than the last, earning even Beru's admiration. "You're getting stronger with every blow, Gray," Beru remarked, encouraging him to keep pushing his limits to become the weapon Suho could one day depend upon. Watching from the shadows, Suho was equally stunned at the wolf's rapid progress. But what truly stood out was the bond forming between Beru and Gray, a respect built on shared trials and aspirations. Then, something unexpected caught Suho's attention. A system message appeared in his vision. It read that Suho had gained experience from Gray's kills. Startled, Suho muttered, How is that even possible?" Bewildered, he called Beru over, who was casually scratching Gray behind the ears. "Beru, do you understand this?" "I just received experience from Gray's hunting," Suho explained, still baffled. Beru inspected the notification and explained, "It's similar to how your father once gained experience through his shadow army. You're sharing in the rewards of battle, almost like splitting the gains in a game." The realization hit Suho. Even if he was only receiving a fraction of the experience, it was still an immense advantage. His excitement grew. "Gray, from now on, you're in charge of clearing out the enemies," Suho announced, his eyes glinting with anticipation. Gray, overhearing this, was hit by a mix of shock and exhaustion, but before he could react, a new system notification appeared: "Dungeon cleared. New quest unlocked. Daily quest." "Finally," Suho said, eager to see the next challenge. The daily quest seemed straightforward: defeat goblins and clear the dungeon. Yet a question lingered in Suho's mind: why was he now receiving daily quests? Then, the answer dawned on him, hinting at the system's deeper intentions. Daily quests meant daily rewards, which meant Suho had an opportunity to grow stronger each day. Beru chimed in, noting, "It looks like the system wants you to seize control of this entire dungeon as part of your domain." Suho nodded, but then he faced a new challenge. How am I supposed to gather 100 goblins in such a massive place? A thought struck him as he recalled an item from a previous dungeon, a horn flute that could summon nearby goblins. Wasting no time, Suho pulled the flute from his inventory and blew into it. Within seconds, goblins began charging from every direction. Perfect, he thought, feeling the adrenaline kick in. Beru, watching his master's strategy unfold, gave an approving nod. With a confident grin, Suho launched himself into the fray, his fists crashing down on the goblins with crushing force. As he tore through the swarm, Suho realized the thrill of fighting goblins was fading. They no longer presented a real challenge. But he had a quest to complete, and he'd make it interesting. Suho blew the horn again, summoning an even larger horde of goblins, and decided to take things up a notch. Raising the bodies of the defeated goblins, he called forth a shadow goblin army to join him. What started as a simple battle had now escalated into an all-out war within the dungeon. Beside him, Gray and the shadow soldiers charged with relentless intensity, mowing down the goblins with ruthless precision. For 3 grueling hours, they fought, transforming the dungeon into a battleground littered with goblin remains. By the end, Gray was utterly spent, collapsing to the ground, drained of energy. Suho, however, spotted another system message and couldn't help but smile. Quest complete. But something unusual caught his eye. The counter hadn't stopped at 100. It kept rising. Could this mean more rewards? Suho wondered, his grin widening. What if I push this even further? Gray, already exhausted, could barely process what Suho was planning, but they pressed on, hunting down goblins relentlessly until the system finally confirmed the quest's completion, bringing Suho a sense of satisfaction and anticipation for what lay ahead. Gray looked utterly drained, as if his spirit had left him, while Suho could barely contain his excitement. His gamble had paid off. He had unlocked hidden rewards from the system, a full status recovery, 3 stat points, and 2 rare items, the blessed random box and the cursed random box. The full heal alone felt like leveling up, restoring his strength, and the extra stat points were a great bonus. Now, he faced a choice: should he go for what he needed or what he desired? After weighing his options, Suho decided on practicality and opened the cursed box. His eyes widened in astonishment as Vulcan's gauntlets emerged, weapons that boosted his attack power by 40% and increased physical damage by an additional 30%. Incredible, he murmured, slipping the gauntlets on. I can't turn my shadow soldiers into weapons forever, but with these, who needs that? They're perfect. Eager to test his new gear, he was interrupted by a system message. To his surprise, Gray's status had shifted from admiration to fear. Suho's excitement turned to concern. What's wrong? He asked, looking toward Beru. With a heavy sigh, Beru replied, Gray's not an endless shadow soldier, he's a living creature with limits. Realizing he had overexerted Gray, Suho nodded with a hint of guilt. You're right. Let's take a break. Exiting the shadow dungeon, Suho's thoughts quickly shifted to the Grim Reaper Guild. They needed answers, but where to begin? Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Senior Lim, sounding unusually urgent as he asked for Suho's help. The scene shifted to the hazardous Soul Station field, where Suho met up with Lim. Lim explained his problem. My team was supposed to show up for hauling duty, but they've all gone AWOL, probably still recovering from last night's party. Understanding the predicament, Suho agreed to step in. He donned the protective gear necessary for handling monster corpses, preparing for the labor-intensive work. Soon, the hunting squad arrived, but their leader immediately looked displeased at the lack of handlers. As Suho readied himself for the task, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was brewing beneath the surface. The leader of the hunting party scowled, clearly unimpressed. This dungeon was tough to secure from the Reaper Guild, he growled. If you're understaffed and that causes any issues, I'm reporting this straight to the Hunters Association. Suho studied the situation carefully, observing that the leader, a healer, of all things, was also the highest-ranked member here. As he took in the details, it all began to fall into place: Lim's urgent call, the Reaper Guild's involvement in this dungeon, and the system nudging him forward. This couldn't just be a coincidence, something much larger was at play. Meanwhile, deeper in the dungeon, shadowed figures moved silently in the darkness, their presence obscured by a mist that clung to monstrous shapes. They appeared to be conducting some strange experiment. Suho sensed that this was no ordinary dungeon venture. Whatever lay ahead, he knew the real challenge was about to begin. As the hunters prepared to advance, the dungeon's atmosphere shifted. Flames crackled as the mages in the party cast fireballs, illuminating the pitch-black halls. We've got visibility now, one mage said, his voice steady but tense. The party leader, a veteran hunter with a sharp eye for danger, quickly ordered the team into formation. From the shadows, the enemy emerged, lizard-like creatures, their eyes blazing with a fierce hunger as they approached in packs. The leader turned to Suho and Senior Lim. Stay close to the strike team, he commanded firmly. Collect the bodies the moment they drop, we can't afford any delays. Lim frowned, obviously uncomfortable with the idea. You want us to be right in the middle of the fight, he muttered, but the leader's attention had already shifted back to the approaching creatures. Suho, however, was deep in thought. Lizard monsters? He murmured to himself, unimpressed. These creatures were hardly the kind of threat he had been hoping for, especially after recently acquiring Vulcan's horn. He had anticipated facing a more formidable opponent, something truly worthy of his evolving skills. Yet, he recognized an opportunity here. By watching the hunters handle the lizard monsters, he could learn something valuable about team-based combat, a skill he rarely practiced due to his preference for solo battles. As the hunters faced off against the monsters, Suho braced himself. While this might not be the challenge he expected, there was still much to gain from the coming skirmish. As the strike team clashed with the monsters, Suho crouched low, pressing his hand against the damp earth. In a quiet voice, he whispered, "Arise." Instantly, from the shadows, his summoned army of goblins materialized, each ready and waiting. Suho couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Summoning 7 shadow soldiers now was proof of his growing power. Without a moment's hesitation, the goblins got to work, collecting the fallen monster bodies with surprising speed and precision, even leaving Suho impressed by their efficiency. Meanwhile, the hunters continued their fierce battle, swords and spells meeting the resilient hides of the lizard creatures. As the fight reached its conclusion, the team leader glanced over his shoulder and froze, dumbfounded. The collection work was already finished. Suho's shadow goblins had completed it all in record time. What are those?" the leader managed, his eyes wide with astonishment. Suho stood calmly amid the aftermath, a slight smile playing at his lips. "They're my summons," he replied, as if it were perfectly ordinary. Senior Lim, nervously watching the exchange, braced himself, hoping the leader wouldn't start a confrontation. But to their surprise, the leader suddenly grasped Suho's hand, his expression shifting to excitement. "Join our strike team as an exclusive collector," he said eagerly, his tone filled with enthusiasm. "I'll pay you top rates." Suho raised his brows, momentarily surprised by the offer. "I don't see collection work as a long-term path," he replied carefully, though he couldn't help but appreciate the offer. Unfazed, the leader pressed further. "Then name your price," he insisted. Before Suho could respond, a team member approached them hastily, his face pale and voice trembling. "Captain, we found something unsettling." Curious and alert, the leader and his team followed the man to a small clearing. There, a human corpse lay on the ground, its body shrouded in a strange, ethereal blue flame. Despite the flames, it was evident that this person had been dead for a while. The leader knelt beside the body, his expression darkening. It's definitely human," he confirmed, his voice low and filled with concern. Suho and Senior Lim shared a tense look. "Is this who we think it is?" Lim murmured, his voice barely audible. Suho's face darkened, nodding in affirmation. "Yes, it's a mistborn. I've encountered one before." Not wasting any time, Senior Lim turned to the leader and spoke up. "Captain, this is a mistborn, a creature of immense power. They recently attacked our university, creating widespread chaos. We have to be careful." Before the leader could respond, more corpses appeared nearby, each radiating the same eerie blue flames. One of the hunters hesitated, suggesting they halt the mission and alert the Hunters Association about the strange findings. The leader weighed the situation, noting that the bodies seemed like ordinary humans rather than hunters. With several C-rank hunters in his party, he decided they could handle it. "We're pressing forward," he declared firmly. A hunter, clearly excited for the fight, smirked. "That's what I was hoping for." Suho, however, felt a deep unease. "Mistborn are far more lethal than you realize," he cautioned, but the leader brushed him off. "I'm the one in charge here," he replied, cutting Suho off. "Follow my lead. Let's keep moving." They ventured deeper into a dark, ominous tunnel, the air around them growing colder and heavier. The mages lit the way with flickering flames, casting unsettling shadows on the rough stone walls. The atmosphere felt charged, as if the dungeon itself was warning them to turn back. Meanwhile, deeper within the dungeon, screams reverberated off the stone walls, punctuated by the crackling of blue flames licking at fallen bodies. Watching from the shadows, 3 cloaked figures observed the macabre scene. Their faces hidden behind sinister masks, one figure, wearing a skull mask, growled in frustration. "The flames aren't strong enough. We're running out of resources." Beside him, another figure, resembling a giant rat, gave a grim nod. "We need to replenish our stock soon. With the hyena guild wiped out, we've lost our main supplier," muttered the figure in the skull mask, his voice tinged with frustration. "Without enough fuel, our stardust production will slow." The rat-like creature beside him narrowed its yellowed eyes, baring sharp teeth in a twisted grin. "Humans are nearby," the skull-masked figure suddenly hissed, his tone darkening. Perfect timing. The rat creature licked his lips, unsheathing his blade and letting it drag across the ground with a grating sound. "Leave it to me," he said, slinking off into the shadows with predatory intent. Back in the tunnel, the hunters were battling another wave of lizard monsters. The leader, pleased with their steady progress, took a moment to assess the team, healing those who needed it. "We've had a good run today," he remarked, a rare smile crossing his face. The hunters, pleased by the successful haul, agreed. One of them commented, "Good call on pressing forward. The leader reached into his jacket, pulling out a shimmering orb. Holding it up, he revealed, "This is stardust. Do any of you know what it is?" Curious, the hunters gathered around him, their eyes lighting up. Stardust was a rare and potent stimulant that could temporarily heighten a hunter's abilities. "Why didn't you tell us about this earlier?" one of them asked eagerly. "I was saving it for an emergency," the leader replied, his gaze fixed on the stardust, momentarily captivated by its glow. Suddenly, an ominous shadow loomed behind him. The rat-like creature struck with brutal swiftness, delivering a crushing blow that left the leader writhing in agony. The stardust orb slipped from his grasp and shattered upon impact with the ground. "He's still alive," the creature sneered, surprising the hunters with his cold, mocking voice. As the hunters took in the sight of this high-level monster, panic washed over them. The creature, unfazed, pointed his jagged sword at them, counting their numbers with an unsettling, calculating gaze. "I don't need all of you," he said with a wicked grin. "I'll have some fun with the strong ones, and the rest will die." Out of nowhere, the creature pulled out his own gleaming marble, a piece of stardust. The hunters stared, shocked and horrified. Not only could this monster speak, but it possessed the rare stardust as well. "Let the game begin," the creature sneered, a twisted excitement flashing in his eyes. The hunters sprang into action, but the monster was ready. With a brutal swipe, he struck down the first hunter in a single, bone-chilling move. He turned to the mage who had been illuminating the tunnel and, with merciless precision, dispatched him, casting the tunnel into pitch darkness. The sudden loss of light threw the remaining hunters into chaos. Blind and terrified, they were defenseless. The monster moved through the darkness like a deadly specter, his blade a lethal blur slicing through the disoriented group. Their cries echoed briefly before fading into silence. When the carnage ended, the creature seized the fallen leader by the collar, dragging his body across the blood-stained ground. Firewood secured, he muttered coldly, abandoning the other wounded hunters to their grim fate. As he vanished into the shadows, a chilling silence filled the tunnel. In that moment, a system message blinked into Suho's view, a new quest notification. He quickly scanned it, a rescue mission. His mind reeled as he took in the devastation around him. What in the world happened here? He murmured under his breath, feeling a heavy weight settle in his chest. Noticing Suho's troubled expression, Beru materialized beside him, asking if something was wrong. Suho explained, his voice grim, that the system had alerted him to a quest involving a powerful enemy who had taken the strike team hostage. His eyes returned to the system display, where rewards awaited, depending on how many he could save. A steely determination gripped him. These people were in real, immediate danger. Without wasting another second, he plunged into action. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.